Greetings, investigators, and welcome to our first Game Masters session for Call of Cthulhu 7th Edition rules. We will try and cover most, if not all, of the mechanics of the game, and we hope that our somewhat informal chat will assist and encourage Game Masters to smoothly run their campaign and remove any major stress. Let me go ahead and introduce our GMs. We've got Jeff Wilkins. He's done a couple of things for us. We've got Jerry. Crying out loud! Your name is so tiny on there. I suddenly can't see.
Bryant.
Jerry Bryant. We've got Mick Swan, Tom McKeon, and Wayne Worthy. All of whom have either already done things for us or they're going to in the near future. So we could simply go through the book and hit on all of the aspects, but I think there's some things, a few more that are a bit more important than other things. So let's go ahead and just start with, I think we're going to start with combat and how to handle that. And I think Jeff's going to sort of lead that discussion. So, Jeff.
So, thanks, Tom. First of all, I need to put a disclaimer out there. I consider myself new to all this stuff. I've been playing for about roughly a year, maybe.
Yeah.
But I still have so much to learn. So I'm going to apologize right up front that if I get something wrong. And I certainly don't claim to know everything. But I do feel like I've got a pretty good grasp on the basics of combat. Okay. And what I like about it, I was reading through it again, trying to refresh myself for this. And what I kind of like about it too is that it's like up to the game master or the keeper to how deep in the weeds do you want to go.
Right.
Because you can keep everything really basic and I still think have a great game. And then for some of you, if you want to get into special situations or, well, how does a tree modify my rolls? And then there's probably a rule in there already that would cover all that.
Right.
So I like that fact about how it can be pretty loose or you can really get into some details.
It's also a lot less, it seems to be a lot less involved than like in Dungeons and Dragons where combat, each person does it exactly one after the other, and it can take an hour to fight a small fight.
Mm-hmm. So, I don't know. Does anybody have any questions, or should I just dive in? Or?
Why don't you describe? Give us this, situation. There's two players, and
okay. So the basic, a real simple, somebody wants to punch somebody in the nose. It comes down to there is an order like D&D. It's based on your dex, but that's flexible. So if you get the drop on somebody, then that's considered a surprise attack. If the keeper decides, you can offer the player a chance to see if they're not surprised. So for instance, you could either do a spot hidden and see if maybe they see that the NPC is clenched his fist. And that would give them the chance to possibly avoid a direct hit right off the bat. You can also do a psychology roll to see if their temperament is really changing, and you can kind of see that up in the last minute their facial expression has changed and they're getting ready to punch you. So that's kind of neat too. But basically it is based on dex. And there's an alternate rule that if you really want to, you could do it like D&D where you could roll initiative for it.
Let's just deal with the basic way. Let's say my character and your character wants to punch me.
Yep. So
and I'm not ready for it.
Okay. So if I get you on a surprise, I would have first attack with you basically just not doing anything. It's just I would either hit or miss.
Okay. So what do you do?
So in that case, I would just roll my brawl skill because that's fighting. Okay. And then it's based on the pass-fail. Was it success, failure, extreme, and hard.
Okay.
And each of the different levels basically affect the damage. So a normal success, if you're not reacting in any way, I would basically probably automatically hit, but I would still roll it just to see if you miss by accident.
Right.
And then based on that roll, regular success, you would roll your basic damage, which, let me see if I can grab the sheet. So for unarmed, it's usually 1d3 plus your damage bonus. Right. Damage bonus is calculated based off of, I think it's what, strength and con? Strength and size, I forget.
Right. I think it's, strength and size.
But that's probably, you would probably have that all figured out on your character sheet before you ever get into combat anyway, so it should be on your sheet.
So let's say in this case you're going to throw a punch. We're fighting. You throw a punch, and I decide to try to dodge it. Right.
So that would be the normal combat, because a surprise like that is unusual. Generally speaking, you're going to be aware of it, that you're getting into a fight. So in that case, it comes down to, you have 3 basic choices. You can choose to dodge, you can choose to fight back, or you can choose to maneuver. So dodge and fight back are the two basics, right? You're either gonna try to punch the guy back, or you just try to dodge his fist. So in the case of a dodge, you have your dodge skill, you roll, and the same thing applies. You either get a pass, fail, extreme, or hard. And the idea is that your pass fail is matched up to my pass fail as the person attacking.
So if if you decide to punch and I decide to dodge, and you get a hard success and I get a regular success, then you win. You punch me.
Correct.
I don't succeed in.
Right.
If, on the other hand, I get a hard and you get a regular, then I manage to dodge.
Yep, exactly.
Okay.
Now, here's a good question. Well, I don't know if it's good, but now what about luck? Because we haven't, we've used luck before, but what about in combat? Would you use luck in combat? So say, for an example, you two are fighting, and let's say Tom decides that he wants to dodge. You can call for, or the GM could call for a luck roll, and perhaps the floor is slippery. So depending on, say Tom says, I want to use luck, or I want to roll a luck to see if I can sort of maneuver in this particular environment. He rolls, he gets it. So the guy who's swinging at him might slip, or, something like that. You can use luck in that way. But nobody really talks about luck in combat.
Well, generally speaking, there is a rule that they basically say you're not supposed to use luck in combat.
Now, nor are you allowed to push in combat.
Right. Now, what you're describing about slippery floors, that might be a special situation where you could do something like that.
Right.
But I think basically, if you're just standing in the kitchen and you're trying to punch somebody in the nose, then luck doesn't really apply.
Okay. Well, let's say you guys you're being attacked. Somebody's trying to kill you, and they knock you through a table, and you fall on the ground. And could you use a luck roll to see if you're close enough to grab maybe the leg of the table or something like that to block the oncoming blow or something like that?
In that case, I probably still wouldn't use luck. That would just be the actual combat progression.
Gotcha.
On your turn, if you decide I'm going to try to grab the chair and hold it up, then that would be considered a maneuver.
Okay.
Well, and it's still brawling. Anything that's not involving a gun or a knife, actually a knife is brawling. Anything that's not involving a gun is usually just brawling. You guys are having a bar fight.
Okay.
What about weather? Can I bring that up? I don't believe there are any rule-specific guidelines towards weather in combat. But let's say you're in, the Alps and it's snowing and you're on a slope and the slope is icy and you're sword fighting on it. How would you guys as DMs, go about that. I would do at the beginning of every round, like after a combat set ends, at the beginning of the next set, I would do everyone roll a dex roll or something like that. It's just dependent on the situation. I mean, what about you guys?
You could use penalty dice. Now that's something that I'll almost never come up in our game that we've ever played, but you can use bonus and penalty dice. Does everybody know what that is? Why don't we go ahead and say it? You're rolling 2 dice under normal circumstances. One that's the 10s and one's the 1s. And this gives you a percentage, 85, for instance. But you could theoretically, if I say, let's say you have a penalty dice. In that case, you're going to still roll the 1 dice, but you're going to roll 2 of the 10 dice. And in the case of penalty, you have to pick the higher number. So if you roll a 42 or an 82, you're penalized. It's an 82 is what you actually rolled. Conversely, if you've got a blessing on you or something, then you're going to do the same thing. But in this case, instead of the 42 and the 82, you get to use the 42. You get it? So that's one way you can penalize. So you're fighting in the snow. You're fighting on a steep cliff, and you're on a slippery surface. So it makes it harder. It just makes it harder or easier to do whatever it is you're doing.
Yeah. Well, I guess, in weather circumstances, you could do penalty roll, because then, let's say you're firing a gun and it's raining and it's misty and you can't see the guy's behind a car, and you try to shoot, you always just roll a penalty die. I completely forgot about penalty dice because we hardly ever use them.
Right. Yeah. It's easy to forget them.
It is.
Of course, we brought up pushing, and you can't push a combat or a sanity. Okay. For those who don't know what pushing is, and that's that in the situation where you've rolled a skill roll and you failed, you can push the roll and re-roll the dice, but if you fail, it's going to be far, far worse. And the GM will usually tell you, if you fail this, you are going to drive the car right into a tree instead of a ditch. Something like that.
It's also up to keeper discretion.
Too. Of course. Everything that we do is up to keeper.
They can do it at any time. Yeah.
It's called a rule book, but it's really a guidebook. We the GM has the ability to. Some people refer to the GM as God, but the GM's not God. The GM's a referee, and he can bend the rules as he needs to.
In my games, I'm the God. You can be your referee. I'm going to be a God. I'm just kidding.
Which one? Now, another thing that do you guys kind of get the mechanic of fighting now? So it's both parties, you and the other person, both roll to see who gets the higher level, whether you're brawling or whether you're shooting at one another, or you also brought up maneuver. Maneuver you might use on your friend because your friend has lost his mind and he's about to jump off the cliff, and you want to tackle him to the ground and keep him from doing it. That's still combat. It's just maneuver in this case.
Now, what about...
Is maneuvering the same basic concepts?
Yes.
Yes, but just to clarify, with the maneuver, you're supposed to be... You should have it clear in your head what's happening. I say you, the player, and the GM.
Right.
You need to be clear on what specifically are you trying to accomplish. So, you wouldn't say, I'm going to maneuver and then roll. You have to say, I'm going to try and grab both of his wrists and, pull him to the ground. That would be considered maneuver.
Ideally, combat should be done the same way. You don't say, I'm going to fight this guy. You say, I'm going to punch the guy in the nose.
Yep.
Make it more fun. Make it the role playing. So
now, what about shooting guns that are fully automatic? you want to talk about those rules, the automatic
Well,
shooting?
let me say this. Before the automatic, the shooting basically does work the exact same way as the fighting brawl skill. The one thing you need to keep in mind, too, is the range of your weapon.
Right.
So the GM, I wouldn't expect the GM to have all of those numbers memorized. So I think as a player, that's sort of your responsibility to have that weapon on your sheet and be able to look down and say, okay, I'm 20 yards away. I think there's basically 3 ranges. There's close, medium, and far.
Right.
And depending on each one of those, you would have a different, right.
For instance, I have a 12-gauge shotgun, and it shows that the range is 10, 20, and 50 yards. And to get those, I have to get a 40%, a 20%, or an 8%, and that they do 4, 2, or 1 die 6s.
Right.
So, in other words, at 50 yards, I need an 8% to get that shot, and it's only going to do 1d6. If, on the other hand, the guy's really close, 10 yards away, and now I just need 40% to get him, and it's going to do 4d6 because he's really close. All that should be in the book for each weapon.
Yeah. I think it should be pointed out for people who are new to Call of Cthulhu that Call of Cthulhu does not work like standard role-playing games. That D6 may sound minimal, but it would kill most characters.
Yeah, we don't have very many hit points in Call of Cthulhu.
Yeah.
I think the average is around between like 9 to 13 is your typical hit points.
Yeah. I think I've never had a character that had over 9 hit points.
And that will that can bring us right into the medical. But let's.
Well, can I just real quick?
Automatic weapons.
Yeah, because Wayne, you specifically asked that, and that's one of the things I will admit right up front, I'm still very confused about.
Okay.
It has to do. First of all, I did learn with the revolver. A revolver generally can shoot. I think it would tell you, under the attacks, it'll say like 1/3. So like for a 38 revolver, technically I could fire off 3 shots all at once. Bang, bang, bang.
Bang, bang, bang. Yeah.
But as soon as I declare that I want to do that on my turn, every single shot has a penalty dice.
Okay.
So the first shot has a penalty dice. The second shot, penalty dice. I know it doesn't quite make sense for the first shot because you could be aiming. Yeah. But the idea is that you're spending this extra action to gain extra attacks, and therefore the whole thing is penalized.
Right. You're not taking the time to aim carefully.
Right. The fully automatic, that's where I start to lose it because basically you break down how many shots your weapon has. Like if it fires 100 rounds. There's a way that you can break down all 100 rounds into what they call volleys. And then you determine how many volleys are you going to do? And that would influence penalty dice and things like that.
Okay.
So that's what I'm going to have to get back to you on that one.
Well, that's fine.
That'll come up when we get to gangsters.
Yeah.
Tommy guns. Okay, let's see. So, any other questions on combat? We can always discuss later on. But I think
combat should be really a last resort. And most other RPGs, combat is something that everybody tends to always want to get into. They spend a whole lot of time in it. In Call of Cthulhu, combat is sort of that last resort. You don't walk into a bar and start a fight.
Well, and I'll tell you another one that does come up with combat, and that is there are consequences. If you shoot that guy, the police are going to come and throw you in jail. And that's how you're going to spend your game.
I think that could make an entire episode in and of itself is just the legality of the things that investigators do that they don't realize you really couldn't get away with.
Now you can introduce prejudice into that because there would be definitely something, for instance, if my character was a wealthy business owner and I end up shooting a thug on the street, whether or not the thug was a good guy or a bad guy, and whether or not I'm a good guy or bad guy, the police are probably going to favor. They're going to say, "Oh well, yes, he's a rich person. He was just defending himself."
I would agree if you're playing in the Call of Cthulhu classic era, which would be the 20s.
Yeah.
But in modern day, you would find yourself plastered on the media.
Right. Yeah, it would be completely different in modern.
You could argue that you could link that in with the credit rating, because in the modern age you've got what they call affluenza,
right,
where people do get off simply by being wealthy and privileged.
Yep. That happens in real life too. That happens in real life too. So.
Right.
It certainly does.
All right. So I think that leads us right into medical.
Can I? Sorry, Tom. Can I?
Yes.
I just wanted to add two more quick things. If you decide to do a maneuver, that does bring in one little extra rule where you compare your builds. So, for example, if you're a 30-pound woman or 90-pound woman, if you're a 30-pound woman, you got problems. If you're a 90-pound woman trying to put a 6'3" bouncer in a headlock, you're going to have problems.
Right.
So that's where the build comes in, and again, that generally gets determined when you're building your character. So before you even start the game, you should have your build stat figured out. So and basically, if your build is smaller by 1, you receive 1 penalty die. If it's 2, you receive 2 penalty die. If it's 3, it's impossible. There's no way you can do it.
Right.
So, and the other one little thing I wanted to add on was, what do you do in a draw? So if you get a success and the other guy gets a success, and this goes for both the fighting, the brawl, and the gunfights, it comes down to what the defender was doing. So if the defender chose to dodge, then the draw goes to the defender.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Not the attacker.
Right. Okay. If the defender chooses to fight back, then the draw goes to the original fighter, the original attacker. So it kind of flip-flops there.
Interesting. All right.
Cool. And I think that covers most of the data.
Cool.
Yep.
Okay, let's jump on to medical. And the reason why I brought up medical was my biggest criticism was using medical as if it was some sort of magical spell that heals you of your damage. But right. Jerry, why don't you lead us on that one?
Well, for those that don't know, my name is Jerry. I started playing when Cthulhu first came out, the first edition box set. I am fairly new to the 7th edition. But yeah, Tom's right. A lot of people mistake medical as magic ability. It is not. And you have two different kinds of medicine. You have first aid and the actual medicine skill, which are extremely different. And people need to get that straight. When you suffer a major wound and you're at the verge of dying, you need first aid to sort of plug the holes and stabilize you so that medicine can therefore take over and work on you. Even a doctor cannot treat you until you've been triaged. So you have to get that triage in within the first hour of receiving that wound. After that, it becomes more difficult to heal that wound. If you make a successful first aid roll, then you gain 1 hit point, and that will stabilize you for that period of time. Now, multiple investigators can work on somebody and give them, to make a successful roll, and only one needs to make it. One thing that I would point out is that unlike combat, you can push the roll on medical, but you better be really sure you're going to make it, because you don't want to amputate the wrong leg. Right. Medical is one of those ones where if you push the roll and you fail it, you very well might kill this guy who could have survived.
So let's say somebody gets a big, they're in a knife fight and they get a big slash in their arm.
I thought you were going to say someone fell off a ladder.
Well, I wanted to just, yeah, a ladder. So what you're saying, are we basically saying that multiple people, let's say, can try and do first aid on this person to stop the bleeding, to wrap up their arm. But regardless of how many succeed, they're only going to gain back one.
Right. Multiple players can do it at the same time. You can't like spread it apart. Well, this guy failed, so then we're going to go to this guy over here.
Right.
They both have to be working together in unison to make that roll, and only one needs to succeed, but you're only going to get back the one hit point. You can't just buffer it up and keep doing first aid on the guy. Once first aid affects him and he gets that one hit point back, then we're now at a standstill until medicine steps in.
Right.
I wanted to say physician, but some people will have medicine that don't have physician, that aren't physicians. But medicine now, on the other hand, if you have someone with medicine, they can attempt to heal this guy further. If they succeed, they get 1d3 hit points back immediately. And then every day they get to make a constitution roll to see if they gain another hit point. However, this is what the book says. However, we must balance this out with the fact that magic is not involved. So to do medicine, you need medical equipment.
Right.
You're not going to be able to do this in the field unless you have a surgical kit or what have you. And I say surgeon type stuff, but it depends. I mean, if you break somebody's arm, you can't put a plaster cast on it in the field unless you're lugging around this professional medical kit.
However, you could like if you're out in the woods or something, get a splint, create a splint.
Actually, you know what? Splint is covered under first aid.
Right.
That's what you do to do the first aid. We're talking medicine. Yeah, where you're trying to do long-term. Now, one of the things that I would like to mention is that we need to keep, I talked to Thomas about this earlier, we need to keep in mind the time frame you're playing in. Because back in Gaslight and Classic Cthulhu, there was a completely different version of medicine than what we have in the modern day. For instance, penicillin actually did not become available to the public till 1939, 1940. Before then, there was no antibiotics. And some of the stuff that they used to use back then could kill you in and of itself. Granted, you're in sad shape if you should get a venereal disease from a deep one. But I'm just saying is one of the cures for venereal diseases was mercury.
An arsenic, yeah.
Yeah, and mercury could kill you in and of itself. Well, yeah, arsenic and mercury can kill you in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So you got to take and keep these things in mind. And like I said, you got to be really sure of yourself if you plan on pushing a medical role in the, in pushing any form of first aid or medical, because you could actually kill the person. You could use luck in theory, but once again, it's just one of those kinds of things. You better be pretty sure of what's going on. You can make it 10 times much worse.
Make it much worse, yeah.
And as we discussed in the previous section, this is not like Dungeons and Dragons. Characters start off with an extremely low amount of hit points. A bullet will kill you in this game. You will not shrug it off. A bullet can most certainly kill you. And at the same time, that's a serious wound. You're not just going to brush that off, with a Band-Aid. That's going to take some work. So that's where your medicine comes in. You can use first aid to patch the hole, but it's going to take medicine to fully cure it, and it's not going to be cured overnight.
No, you can fall off a ladder and kill yourself in this game.
Yes.
Now, there's also a big difference between having a major wound and just a scratch or a bump.
Yes.
I was going to bring that up. What are the rules in Call of Cthulhu for major wounds? Because in Pathfinder and D&D, it's whenever you take half or more of your health.
In Call of Cthulhu, when you can get to 0 and it not be major, unless you take it in a lump sum and then it becomes a major wound. If you go down to 0, just nitpick a little here, a little there, you just go unconscious.
Right.
But if you take a major wound, then at this point in time, you are dying. And
Right.
if you keep going lower, you will eventually die. And you have to start making constitution rolls to see if you survive or take more damage that round. And that constitution roll is every round. So this is
Right.
where first aid is extremely
Essential.
important, because you have to stabilize that person before they start making these massive constitution rolls, bleeding out on you.
Right. It shows on our character sheets, if you look up here in the corner, that when you reach 00, you either go unconscious, or if you have a major wound, you're dying. So it's one or the other.
Mhm.
And there's no way, if you go unconscious because you got a concussion, it certainly is possible in the next few minutes or hours that you're going to come back to consciousness and you're going to be able to function somewhat. But if you are dying, you need to go to the hospital. And if you're nowhere near the hospital, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
You better hope that the guy's got a lot of skill in medicine.
Right.
But if someone makes if someone gets an extreme success roll with medicine when healing a major wound, there's an increased rate of healing, isn't there? Isn't it?
Maybe.
By and large, it's really going to fall down underneath the GM. I mean, because if it was me, I would take into account what caused the wound.
In either case, I don't think that you should be ever allowed to go more than 3 points up, because you're wounded. Wounds don't just go away like that. So,
Right.
now,
what are the rules on instant death? I know that there are rules on that in Call of Cthulhu, where something like a certain amount of damage, when it hits you, you're automatically dead. There's no dying; you're just dead. What are the rules on that?
I have not actually got that far into it. However, I would state that if you hit 0 in one round, then you're probably dead.
right.
Well, if you such a massive amount of damage in one round that it would put you unconscious, that would obviously be a major wound. You'd be unconscious. You'd be at this point in time effectively dead.
You could also say it depends. The GM is going to understand the story. If somebody fires a cannon and you get hit by the cannonball, you're dead.
You're dead.
Yeah.
I think the example they give in the rule book is being hit by a train.
Yeah. You're dead.
Yeah. To answer your question specifically, Thomas, that is the rule. It's half your maximum hit points.
Okay.
Would count as a major wound.
Yeah, half of the damage. So, okay, so it's basic D&D logic where if it's half, it's
But just to clarify, it's half of your maximum. So if your maximum is 10, it's always you need 5 or less. So even if you have 6 hit points, it doesn't drop to 3. It's still 5 points for a major wound.
This is actually also written on the bottom of your right here. On the bottom of your character sheet.
Does it say the death amount?
Yep, the death amount is your full max hit points.
Yeah.
So if you take all of that, you're dead.
Yep, you're dead.
Right, so yeah.
Flat out.
My character in the last game had 9 hit points. If I had took 9 hit points from falling off the ladder, I'd be dead on the spot.
Mm-hmm. And it also shows here that your natural healing rate when you're healing from these things is on a weekly basis, not a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, there is, I think, a clarification in the rulebook saying that if you're in a
Hospital?
A hospital, or even if you're in a comfortable bed at home, then it's 1 hit point per day.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
What about
Okay.
if you're like, say, situation wise, you're in the woods, you're camping, one of the party members is a doctor. Would it then be 1 day, or is it 1 week?
It'd be 1 week then, because you wouldn't have full access to a hospital facilities.
Right, or the medical stuff that he would need.
Yeah, there would just be maintenance, wouldn't it?
Right, it would just be
It
maintenance.
wouldn't be proper, what's it called, palliative care.
So it all comes down to the discretion, in a way, of the GM what's available. But yeah, to make it realistic, that's what you would do. Now, the segue I want to go into sanity also has to do with medical, and that's that somebody who's a medical doctor or a surgeon is not necessarily, when we're dealing with sanity, they're not going to be dealt with in the same manner that a doctor, I mean, a lawyer or a shopkeeper would be, because when they see somebody's leg cut off or something like that, they've seen it before. They're not going to freak out and scream and run away. So with that, I want to just move into sanity, unless anybody has any more medical questions.
Well, I'm wondering to what level medicine and first aid skills can interact with each other. I mean, if you have someone who has first aid skill and they have a medicine skill as well, say that someone is poisoned. Presumably, if they're going to use first aid to treat the poison, would they, prior to that, would they roll medicine to try and determine what that person has been poisoned with?
No, I'm pretty sure that it specifically states in there that first aid cannot be used to treat poisoning.
Right.
But now keep in mind that even if you are a full-on doctor, you still have to use first aid to triage the patient and stabilize them before medicine becomes a viable option. So you can't, if you have skill in medicine but not in first aid, you can't treat the person until they've successfully had first aid treated upon them.
Correct.
They have to be stabilized before the medicine skill will have any effect on them.
Yep.
So if you had medicine and not first aid, you'd essentially be more sort of a consultant, a specialist.
Right. Well, you
would have to depend on somebody else to succeed on before you can jump in.
You might be a major surgeon and you know everything there is to do about repairing the inside of the body, but how to put a splint on somebody, you've never ever had to deal with that. Or,
medicine is the doctor, first aid is the ER nurse.
Right. That also leads into a thing about skills, but we'll do that in a little bit. So we were going to go into sanity now.
Yes, we are. A discussion led by most likely the most emotionally unstable out of all of us.
I'll challenge that.
I'll challenge it.
Well, we'll get into it later after this. All right. So, sanity is honestly what I love so much about Call of Cthulhu. I've DM'd 3.5 D&D and then Pathfinder 3.8 for close to 10 years. As soon as it came out, I was on it. Now, in the past year, I've gotten into Call of Cthulhu. And what I love about Call of Cthulhu so much is the fact that it is entirely roleplay heavy. Tom was mentioning that D&D is mechanic. It's just mechanic based. I don't believe it was on the live chat, but it was later or earlier before we did it. He was mentioning it was mechanical, and that's very true. Call of Cthulhu is entirely and there can be debate about this, but I believe that Call of Cthulhu relies almost entirely on the players playing, because it is roleplay sensitive. It is character sensitive, and that's what I love about it so much. Now, sanity is a mechanic in Call of Cthulhu that I love because it is roleplay heavy, roleplay sensitive. Essentially, what sanity is on your sheet, if Tom wants to show that, there's a power statistic. The power statistic is what determines your sanity. Sanity is essentially your emotional well-being. And what we're going to talk about right now is what happens when you lose sanity, because that's always fun. So to start us off, we're going to go over some examples of what would cost sanity.
Well, and there are multiple ways of how to handle this. It depends on the GM.
Yeah. And Tom was also bringing up like a doctor seeing like a sawed-off leg, like an amputated leg. And we'll go into that a little bit. But right now, I just kind of want to go over if Wayne's character is a businessman, what would some examples of sanity loss be? Businessman Wayne has never seen a mangled animal carcass, probably. So he's never seen guts splayed out in the dirt. So he's going to lose 1 sanity point. So animal carcass is your bottom, and then seeing, as the book puts it, seeing Cthulhu rise from Rayleigh is easily, it depends on the DM or the GM or the keeper. It can either be 1d10 all the way up to 1d100.
Right.
And I know I just gave like a huge broad spectrum, but lots of the scenarios that keepers will play with, when there's something sanity heavy, where something is going to cost the player sanity, it'll generally tell you what the scenario believes to be a good loss: 1d4, a 1d6, a 1d8. For homebrew, it's
I was just going to say, you always have to modify that because you don't want all of your characters going completely insane in the first 20 minutes of the game.
Right.
Yeah. And with homebrew, it's completely up to DM discretion. Even in scenarios, it's technically up to DM discretion.
Right.
Because that's the difficult thing about this is that the Call of Cthulhu Chaosium has built kind of a skeleton for us to use, and we kind of have to put the meat and muscle on it. But we're now going to talk about a little bit about temporary insanity, indefinite insanity, and permanent insanity, which I don't think we've ever had in any of our games. But
those two, Tom and Jeff.
We've had temporaries.
We've had temporaries. We've never had an indefinite or a permanent. I know we've never had a permanent, but none of it. I don't know about an indefinite.
Well, no, actually we have. Wayne's character from the Blood Red Fez went permanently insane.
Oh,
yeah.
So, for people who don't know, because this is kind of, we're talking to an audience that hasn't seen this yet. So, when a character loses up to 5 sanity, they hit the realm of temporary insanity, which is when the DM or the keeper kind of takes control and says, this is what happens. Now, me personally, I don't like taking control of a character and making them do something. I always kind of just say, this is what's happening with your character right now, this is what your character's feeling, and then let the character
play it.
Play it.
Yeah.
Because it takes the fun away.
It depends on the group that you're playing with. Some people, when they role play, they want to be the heroes all the time. They don't want anything bad happening to their characters. You get other players who like the idea of the mechanic of this, going insane, and would love to play those type of characters. And the temporary insanity works out there. So, for example, they might get some sort of like some sort of disorder or whatever, something that's temporary, and then you have to play that as your character. You might have OCD or something like that for a short period of time.
Well, really,
Or,
quite honestly, if you come into if this is the first time you're walking into a Call of Cthulhu game, once again, as opposed to Dungeons and Dragons, if you are only interested in playing a character that succeeds in everything and they become more powerful and more wonderful as the time goes by, this is not the game for you. This is a game where you have to sort of embrace the horror that your character is probably
going to die
or going to go completely stark raving mad. And that's the fun of it. That's what we want. You want to play an interesting character.
It's a ticking clock.
Right.
Yeah.
To kind of build off of that, from the other side of the spectrum, yes, you had to kind of go into Call of Cthulhu with that mindset, but don't think that, like, if you're going to be a player, if you're watching this, you're going to be a player. Don't think that going in, you're going to die, or that it's inevitable. You need to play, like any game, you need to play to win. You need to play to survive. It's just in Call of Cthulhu, it could mean you survive the whole time, or you see how long you can survive.
Right. Don't rush into death. That's
right.
Yeah.
Nobody does that.
Right.
Yeah. Don't think that just because your character is soft and squishy and you're probably going to die anyways, that you need to grab the first gun and run it.
Now, there are a lot of mechanics that the book attaches to sanity that I really, personally, I treat them more as, once again, guidelines. I've had GMs who go in, and when the person hits 5 hit points of damage, they roll a dice to decide which crazy insanity that person's going to get off of a table in the book. And sometimes it's ridiculous, the insanity they get, and it doesn't fit the situation.
Now,
I have little cards that I use.
Yeah, I was going to mention that. I was going to actually mention it. I mean,
but oftentimes in the situation, I will take this card out because this is the red mist. This is the one where the character pulls out their gun and just starts shooting in all directions, their friends and everybody else, because they're terrified out of their mind. And it's like, yeah, I don't want to do that right now. It's not appropriate.
How I treat sanity, and I'm sure that all 6 of us treat sanity differently. And I'd love to hear everyone's kind of take on sanity. But my take on sanity is this: no matter what happens, when you lose a sanity point, something happens.
Exactly.
It's not but to me, it's not like a soft little shudder. It's like you see something so traumatic that your mind can't process it, and you're shocked and you're disturbed. And so, bare minimum, what's going to happen to you is, you're gonna gasp like loudly, or you're gonna kind of take a step back, or you're gonna cry out, or you're gonna try and like make a move to run away, but then stop yourself.
Right. And yes, exactly. And it's room and goes boo. You're going to hit 1 point of sanity because you're going to probably go and jump.
Yeah.
Okay.
And, I mean, we in real life we do that. If you were to watch a horror movie with jump scares, so you're going to jump.
Right. You get progressively 1, 2, 3, and 4. At 4, you are most definitely screaming, when something happens. But then you regain your composure immediately.
Right.
When you hit 5, that you black out and run for 2 rounds and you suddenly find yourself in an alley about back because you don't even know how the hell you got there.
Yeah. For temporary insanity, what I do is I use the table in the book kind of at my discretion. Like I'll take what they say and kind of mix it around. But I will use the Bouts of Madness table. because I mean, it's kind of, you know, oh no, you lose 5 sanity and then the character runs away. Like, you know, that, yes, that could happen, but doing that every single time, you know, there's no variety to it. Now, what happens if you're in the middle of combat, a deep one crawls out, and the character freezes and locks in place in the middle of a gunfight?
Right.
Right.
Now it's
That
up to
makes
the
sense.
other players to try and grab them and drag them away, or feint, or, you know, or whatever. Tom, you bring up the Red Mist card, the Violence card.
Right.
But honestly, I would see that as, other than the flee scenario, I see that as the second most logical thing. Like, when you lose that much sanity, it's a flight or fight response.
Right.
And I just
Of course,
imagine,
you have to decide if at 5 points of sanity damage, the person's lost enough sanity to where they would shoot their best friend standing next to them, not realizing what they've done. That's what the Red Mist is.
now,
I can see paranoia, flee, and panic.
You know, let me throw in a little thing from my personal life. When I was in boot camp, we're all out on bivouac, and you know, we're camping in these little tents, and they came in and dropped CS gas on us. Now, I consider myself a rather intelligent person, and I know that I was with a bunch of other people that were intelligent. But when they dropped that gas, it had an effect on people like you wouldn't believe. People were throwing down their gas mask and running, even though the logic would have said, put on gas mask. Mm-hmm. People were just throwing them down, throwing their rifles down just to get away from it. So if you were to suffer from the Red Mist and, you know, you just totally blank out, I could see just opening fire in random directions because your brain is not thinking, I don't want to shoot Tom over here. My brain is going, kill, defend.
Right. You're absolutely right, and the GM can do exactly that. I tend to take it out only because, well, I might leave it in at the very end of a story, but not in the beginning, just because I don't want that to happen. It changes the whole story all of a sudden. Right.
I am a firm believer, like you, Tom, that the punishment has to fit the crime. If you see, you know, I'll go back to when you were playing the Derelict. When you were in the water and you were being attacked by the shark, if someone was to take a sanity roll and fail it, you're not going to get an insanity such as, you know, I don't know, fear of the dark because you were in the water with the shark. It just doesn't make sense.
But fear of the ocean would
now that's perfectly normal.
Right.
So I think that the insanity would have to fit the cause.
So
yeah,
okay.
Exactly.
So those. Now we're dealing with over 5 points. You're getting a bout of insanity, and it only lasts a short period of time.
Before we go there, I want to ask Thomas something. Is that sanity loss 5 at one time, or just 5 over the course of a period of time?
It's okay. So anytime a character, when you roll, so let's say the sanity calls for. So yes, there's, to answer your question, yes to both. So if you lose 5 sanity over the course of the scenario, a bout can happen. Now, if you were to lose 5, and then you dealt with it, and you're like, okay, it then resets. Right. It then goes back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The next 5, another thing happens. Another temporary insanity happens. And that's going to lead me now into indefinite insanity. Because what happens now when you've, you know, gone through 5 bouts? That's 25 points, and that's a fifth of your sanity. That leads us into indefinite insanity. Now, the book says that it's up to keeper discretion, but their guideline is generally about a day. It's essentially, imagine if all the characters are in the woods and the trees are coming alive and all this stuff is happening, and one character is going crazy, and they drag him back to a cabin, and they lock the door, and the sun comes up. Then the book says that, when the sun comes up, you feel kind of safe. It's essentially when the character himself feels safe is when the insanity goes away. If it requires them to go home and sit down and have a drink, that's what you need to do. If you just need to see the sunrise, that's fine. Or when the danger is gone.
But the GM,
gone.
The GM also can add permanent psychoses to that if he wants to.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we'll go into the side effects after permanent insanity, which I'll go into now, which is when it reduces to 0.
Right.
Now, that's pretty simple. When your sanity hits 0, you're permanently insane. There's no coming back from it. There is no cure, essentially.
Right.
Now, for indefinite insanity, and sometimes, if it serves the keeper or serves the character or whatever, it just depends. Sometimes temporary insanity, we get what the book calls underlying insanity, which is the side effects. Now, lots of times keepers like to do like phobias, like Tom brought that up, like fear of the ocean and fear of the dark, as, you've lost so much sanity because of this thing that you've developed a fear. The book also goes into the possibility of losing so much sanity that you begin having delusions.
Right.
Now, delusions go away. Delusions will go away if you do a psychoanalysis, and we'll go into that. But in order to do delusions, the character needs to do reality checks, which is they need to perform a sanity roll. So let's say Tom's character is standing on the street, and he's seeing all the people, and all of a sudden, all the people start bleeding from the eyes. And he's like, is this real? Is it not real? He needs to make a sanity roll. If he fails the reality check roll, the sanity roll, he loses automatically 1 point of sanity, and he cannot tell if it's real or not. If he succeeds, then the delusions kind of dissipate and they go away. However, for delusions, I recommend not doing them with characters that you have not played with for a long time, or in a group that's just started. Because in order to do delusions, and even phobias, it requires the character to do some pretty intensive role-playing.
Right.
Because Wayne brought this up, lots of times, you love your character so much you just don't want them to die. You don't want anything bad to happen to them. And sometimes you like the group so much you don't want the group to fail because of you. But sometimes the group needs to go into a scary mansion, and because of your history in scary mansions, you don't want to go in the scary mansion, and nothing's going to make you go in.
Except Scooby snacks.
Except for Scooby snacks. But I don't think those were invented until the 60s. But delusions kind of play the same way. In order for delusions to work, if they fail, is that the character needs to see them, and you need to role play the character seeing them. None of the other characters can. And and it requires a lot of investment into the character. It needs a lot of time, and it needs a lot of prep. And so I don't recommend GMs putting the delusion factor on characters that have either just started or groups that have just formed together, or essentially anything that's not a continuous thing.
Right.
If the character is a one-time thing, who cares about delusions? But if the character's going to come back for different scenarios, you're going to be playing that character for a long time, and you've invested a lot into it, by all means, do delusions if you feel it is impactful to the character and it makes sense for the story. Now we're going to talk about treatment. Now, temporary insanity, as the book says, it can either last for, if it's combat, if it happens during combat, it lasts for the combat round, or the duration of combat, or it lasts for 1d10 hours if it's not in combat. So it's a while. And that's even, like temporary insanity, if it's 1d10 hours, it's even when the character feels safe. The bout of madness, like if they're paranoid, if they got that, and it's 10 hours, they're going to feel paranoid for 10 hours.
Right.
There's no going away until the 10 hours, and then they feel relieved. To recover from temporary insanity, it's just to wait. Now, indefinite insanity, as we brought up, it can be that the character feels safe, and they feel fine, and it'll kind of go away. But sometimes something happens like Shub-Nagrath shows up, and you just got a glimpse, but that was enough to take down 1/5. Then you need to be either institutionalized, or the character needs to go to professional private help.
Right.
A psychologist, a psychiatrist, anyone really in the mental health field. Then they need to do psychoanalysis, or alternatively, psychiatric medications if it's delusions.
Right.
If it's a phobia, then psychoanalyze. If it's delusions, if it's hallucinations, auditory, visual, whatever, you do medication. What you need to do is you need to roll a 1d100. A result of 1 to 95 is considered a success. And then you get, like medical, like Jared brought up in medical, it's then a 1d3. 3 is the maximum, 1 is the minimum. If you fail, a failure is a 96 to 100, then you actually lose sanity. Because therapy triggered something, or the drugs didn't help, they just made it worse. Because as Jerry brought up, if we're talking about classic Cthulhu, for schizophrenics, they use, and they still do, they use lithium.
Right.
And that's like, no, lithium is bad for you, everyone. Lithium is bad for you. And so sometimes the drugs don't work, and they just make things worse. You then lose, if you fail a psychoanalyze, 1d6. And then you can't, like medical, you can't, if you fail once, you can't do it again. You failed, that's it. You can only do private care, psychoanalyze, or medication once a month. Institutionalizing, in the book says it's sort of like medical, except they're like officially in an institution.
Right. They're
Like they
getting constant treatment.
Yeah. Now, in my opinion, as a GM, if a character wishes to become institutionalized, they cannot play that character for a while.
Right.
Because once you're institutionalized, you need to get all the way back up before you can go do something.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you're not invested in the character, they lose a lot of sanity. go ahead and put them in an institution.
Well, also keep in mind that while, especially during the classic period, while it was easy to be institutionalized, it was quite another thing to get out of the institution.
Right.
You had to show that you were well healed before they were going to let you out.
Well, there was actually quite a big difference between one sanitarium and another. Some of them were insane asylums where they had crazy people, and the other ones were basically places where you could go and sip tea and sit out in the garden, and if you had money because you were taken care of, it was just a place for you to rest. And
it always goes down to money, doesn't it?
Well, there was some certainly where the experience of being committed to certain institutions would have had a negative effect on your sanity in and of itself, I think.
Something I wanted to bring up that I noticed that we all tend to get wrong, and that's when we do our sanity rolls. What the book says is technically this. Let's say you tell me to roll a 1d8 and I roll a 6. So I've lost more than 5.
Yeah.
It's not automatic at that point. What I'm supposed to do then is roll an intelligence roll. And if I succeed or fail in that intelligence roll, if I fail, then I don't take a temporary insanity. If I succeed, then something in my brain has fully understood what I'm seeing and driven me completely bonkers for a few minutes. So there's that one extra little step in there, that intelligence roll. Which we always forget. We always just make the person.
Now, but that only applies to temporary insanity. It does not apply to indefinite or permanent.
Right. Then they've already lost those things.
Yeah, they've lost a fifth.
There's also go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to then say that you can also regain sanity by completing a scenario called the Keeper Award. You can also, or there's 2 other ways. Psychotherapy, psychoanalysis, we talked about that. But the third one that I didn't know about was when you have a skill increase to 90. When you increase the skill all the way to 90, which GMs, Tom's going to talk about it probably, but a skill can't go above 90, is what I'm told.
It would be extremely difficult for it to ever go above 90 anyway.
Yeah. But when you reach a skill of 90, you regain 2d6 sanity.
Now you said something that really calls for GM discretion. The so-called awards. We might do at the end of we talk about. Of course, the characters are not aware of scenario or awards. What these almost invariably are is if the players have done something that helps them deal with the insanity. For instance, if there's something that has driven them to almost manic proportions, but they finally killed it and stopped it from taking over the world, then they might gain some sanity back because of their success. Or if, for instance, they showed compassion and not selfishness in a situation, that sometimes will get them their sanity back. They're using their mind, and they're using it in a very positive way to counteract the darkness, so to speak. Those are good things to do.
Now, I've got 2 more things, and then I'm done. 5 minutes. The last way to regain sanity is, which I think is the funnest way. The book calls it self-help, which is where a player, and the GM, talk amongst themselves about the character's backstory. They say, well, my character he's afraid of the dark, and he wants to deal with it. He was in the mansion and the scary thing happened. He wants to deal with it. So then the keeper and the player, or the group, will then go in that scenario, a keeper's discretion, and do essentially what the book calls a scene. I call it kind of a side quest, where they revisit the location. They deal with it. They role play the scene, and they Tom's character and Jerry's character sit down and they're drinking, and they have to role play talking to one another about, Tom's fear of the ocean. Because Tom needs to get over it, because in the next scenario, it's the ocean or something like that. And they know that it's coming, and so Tom's like, I don't think I can do it. And Jerry is like, well, you need to. Here's why. And they do a scene together. At that point, it's up to keeper's discretion how much sanity is regained by doing role-playing with one another. But it's generally a 1d6.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So remember, players, keep Tony Robbins on your speed dial.
The final thing, and then we'll get to the next thing or ask some questions, is what Tom brought up in medical, which is a doctor sees an amputated leg, and he's just it's an amputated leg. He's seen it before. When you become hardened, which a character will if you play them for a long time and they survive for a long time, is that after a while, seeing dead bodies, seeing blood, it's keeper's discretion. I say 3 times. 3 is the magic number. When they see 3 bodies, they kind of like a body is a body unless there's something specifically wrong with it. And then 3 times after that, when they see enough blood and guts, it's blood and guts. They've seen it before.
They become immune to the situation.
Yeah, they become desensitized. Now, mythos creatures. When, let's say, the group sees an elder thing come from a cave and fly up in the sky, they lose the sanity, yeah. But the next time they see an elder thing, no sanity loss. Because they've seen one.
Right.
If you've seen one deep one, it doesn't matter if you see 1,000 deep ones coming out of the water, because you've already seen one. You've already gone through the necessary.
Kind of.
Yeah. If you saw suddenly 1,000 of them coming out of the water, that would probably be. But yes, we understand what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah.
I do think though that there is a limit to that. Right. Seeing a deep one, yes, you could get used to that. Seeing something, a greater thing, Cthulhu, you're never going to get used to that.
No.
Yeah. That only applies to the lesser servitor races like deep ones, or independent races such as the Elder Things or the Great Race of Yith, because they're strange and they're alien, but at least when we see them and we kind of get over it, we can work through it. Seeing it again, it will shock and disturb, but it won't be. What I'm saying is that seeing an elder thing again isn't going to be a 1d10. It'll be a 1d3.
They're animals. Yeah, they're animals. Right. They're not mythical beings.
Now, seeing Cthulhu, seeing any deity, as the book calls them, requires every time you look at them, you lose the appropriate amount of sanity.
Right.
1d10 to 1d100. No matter what.
It's usually game over at that point.
Yeah, when you see Yog-Sothoth come through the portal, you're pretty much that's pretty much the end of the game, because the world is done, and then 2, that's pretty much the end of your character, because you saw,
Right.
I and the which one, the one that I ran, where both
Derelict.
Not Derelict, the other one, the King's
Mysterium.
I was trying to be on a sort of fence with how much sanity Tom and Jeff's character was going to lose, because I didn't want them to. I wanted them to sort of finish it. So I mean, of course, that's up to the GM's discretion. But I totally get what you're saying. If you see something like that, you're losing a lot. That's why they were like kind of losing, I think, 1d10 per round.
Yeah, they were losing
something
1d10
like
every round.
Yeah.
Now the only thing I'd like to add to the whole sanity thing is sanity is really it's all up in your head, and it has a lot to do with the role playing in the game. And I think that there are different approaches. You can, of course, go with the roll when they roll for the sanity and they get a bad roll and they've suffered in some way. That can be played immediately. I also like occasionally to have it not played immediately, that the individual is in a combat situation and they continue in the combat situation. They've lost the sanity, but they've suffered no ill effects at the moment. But after the fight's over, after they're in the safe place, then it hits them. What just happened to them? And they curl up in a ball in the corner and start shaking all over. That seems a little more realistic. But that's of course all up to it's all up to the GM
and
how he wants to play this.
I mean, like even with that, you could use something like the luck roll for an example.
Right.
So it's either fight or flight, and if you roll through and they make their luck roll, they continue the fight, and then afterwards they suffer from there.
You've just temporarily displaced when it's going to happen to them.
Well, also, kind of along the same lines is I want to go back to something that Thomas said in the beginning, that one of the things that he likes the most about Call of Cthulhu is that it's heavy element of role play.
Right.
I wouldn't suggest that a keeper do this with everybody, but if the keeper knows that the player has a good sense of role playing, I personally would be okay with letting the character lose every bit of sanity and still continue to play the game if he can play it appropriately.
Some people love playing the insane character.
I mean, at the very least, he just changes his profession from antiquarian to cultist. But I mean, if he's capable of role-playing that character appropriately.
Well, it also depends on, it can be very clever. The GM can give them a psychosis that the other players are not aware of. That's when you use your typing thing to type a personal message directly to that person. I think of when we were playing, which one was it? It was Jeff. It was the game that you played, the first one. The one that you ran.
Deadlight.
The Deadlight.
Deadlight. The second half of that.
Blackwater Creek.
Yeah, Blackwater Creek. Corey's character had gone insane enough to where he became a habitual liar. And I only knew that because Corey couldn't make it one night and I had to play his character. But when I did, it was like it was so freaking enjoyable to just make bullshit up and make you all think that I wanted you to think that I was telling the truth.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can do things like that. And if the person's willing to play the character, it's a lot of fun.
It's like how I'm playing Hero right now. And it adds a little bit of suspicion and horror to it because, of course, this is a character that Kenji knew for a while, and Bob and Ralph are getting to know. And all of a sudden, he's got this tome. He's constantly got his head into this tome, and he's more withdrawn from the group. And when he does...
We're playing a private game where Wayne's character has got a tome and he's keeping it a secret and he keeps reading from it, and as he's doing it,
and it's fun to play because he started off as a skeptic. He didn't believe in magic or any of this other stuff, and then he tried out one spell and he's got hooked on it, and he's lost a lot of sanity so far in the game, and his maximum sanity has dropped by like 30 points, 33 points or something like that. So, and I mean, I enjoy playing it, and as long as Tom is going to let me keep playing this character, and then
he's functionally insane.
Right. But the more I start getting more and more insane, the more I will add the role play in there, and one day my character might actually do something that might harm the other players.
What?
But they might seem, But I mean, but it may seem logical and everything like that. and that's the other part of the dark fear of Call of Cthulhu. You never know who's who, basically.
Mm.
And
go ahead.
Oh, I was going to also make it clear that Cthulhu Mythos points. When you gain Cthulhu's Mythos points, you don't lose current sanity; you lose max sanity.
Right.
It goes when you get one Cthulhu Mythos point. If your sanity is 60, it doesn't go from 60 to 59.
Right.
It is 90.
It goes from
it goes from 99 to 98.
Right.
And that's the more that you know in Cthulhu Mythos, the more unstable, I guess, you are ultimately.
Right.
And sometimes something that I, as a keeper, kind of like to do is as you slowly learn more, your alignment, your beliefs may shift from Wayne the businessman into Wayne the cultist, such as like Walton, because Walton Famous, his alignment's shifting now.
Yeah, that asshole.
That asshole. For the people that don't realize this, that your sanity can go higher than your original
power.
sanity.
Yeah, it can go higher than your power.
Right. It can go up too. So can we let's move on to magic.
Let's move on. We're done with insanity now. So
all right.
Sorry. Wait, can I jump in? Yeah.
Sure.
Two things. It's driving me crazy because I can't find it in the book, and yet I swear I read it somewhere. So maybe I read it on the forums or something. But there's one, like, it's kind of like an alternate rule for playing sanity, which I thought was really fun. A player can choose to deny sanity loss. So, like, if you see a ghoul and the keeper says you're going to take 1d5 sanity and you roll 5 sanity loss, the player can say, no, I'm going to choose to deny that. But you still mark your sheet. And then at some point, hopefully the player plays along and just, doesn't just deny everything. But at some point, the idea is that your brain, your mind is going to snap. And at which point you immediately will lose 12 sanity points at one shot.
Right. That goes into magic as well.
Yeah, and
I just thought that was a really fun.
Tomes, yeah.
It's a form. I've seen that exact form post. So it's a form post, but it's a good one. It goes into the insane insight additional rule that says when a character goes insane, they may not go actually insane. They may actually see an inkling of truth and then regain all their sanity points.
Yeah. Right. And then the other real quick thing I wanted to add was I'm not disagreeing with you guys as far as like when you use the chart to roll randomly to get a phobia or a mania. Right. Personally, I actually enjoy that because it's still a game at some point. Right. So like if I like the idea of just randomly giving somebody like, I don't know, you have an obsession with poetry or something. Like it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But to me personally, that's still fun to role play in the game. And, it's like, I guess to each his own, I guess is what I'm saying.
It's like Eldridge fear of music.
Well, it's one thing that is one of the great pleasures of GMing a game, and that's that you can pass secret messages to the players that's just between you and the player. Yeah. So that they can do things that the other people have no concept of what's going on.
Right. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's really fun because
that's awesome.
Watch the other players try to figure out, well, what is he doing? Why does he keep hearing dogs barking and I don't?
Right. Why is he saying that? Why is he telling lies?
Yes.
Or is he telling lies? Or,
right. Why is he saying that 40 people are going to show up and kill us all?
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And then drive back.
So let's talk about magic. And I'm going to need to run for just 1 second. I'll be right back, but just go ahead and start on magic.
All right.
Okay.
So I'm going to start on magic. And unlike the way that you guys were doing it, I'm going to have it more as like a discussion of what we should do as far as magic goes, how and when to actually use magic. Now, magic in Call of Cthulhu isn't like D&D where, you'll go to a library, you'll find a spell book and you can read it, write it down and do the spell. It takes the way it speaks about it in the rule book, if you come across a mythos tome, you have to spend a lot of time actually studying it. You can basically do like an initial reading of the tome, and after you do that, you'll take sanity. There's no like sanity roll. You'll take sanity based on what type of tome it is. So, for an example, if you were to pick up the Necronomicon, I think it does 2d10, if I'm not
2d10.
mistaken. 2d10 of sanity loss. So you'll roll that, and that's how much sanity you'll lose just from doing an initial reading. Now, if you want to dive further into it, you'll have to spend more and more time, and that's up to the GM's discretion. So you could do something like 1d10 weeks or something like that on how long it's going to take you to actually study it. The other thing that goes into it is the language of each tome. Each tome is written in a different language. It could be an earthly language like Turkish or Arabic or Latin or something like that, or it can be something completely alien. If it's something like an earthly language, you'll have to understand that language or learn that language in order to sort of translate the writings. And a lot of times these writings are mixed in with a lot of insane babble from the writer itself. Now,
not to mention that they might not just be in, let's say, Greek or Latin, but they might be in a form of Greek or Latin that hasn't been used in 2,000 years.
Correct.
So you really need to be a scholar.
Right.
Wayne,
right. Yes.
Because you brought up, earthly languages. Other earthly languages like Alco.
Aklo.
Because
Aklo.
Yeah.
And Hyperborean, I think it is.
Hyperborean, yeah. Let's say that a tome is written in that, and this is not for the people watching. This is like for me. I'm curious as to what you think. But for a book written in Hyperborean or Alco, and your character knows nothing about that language, how do you go about deciphering it if you don't have any way of reading it? You
don't. But what you can do is say that maybe there was somebody already working on deciphering it and they left notes.
Right.
Or
if let's say, for an example, your character is a linguist, so you have an understanding of how languages work. You could spend time, you could do intelligent rolls, and this is the way I would handle it. You could spend the time, do the like intelligent rolls or whatever, but this is going to take a long time. This may take years.
Months. Yeah, years.
Yeah, years. I mean, like months if it's like an older version of a certain language, like Old Greek or like Old Hebrew or Aramaic or something like that. Those are languages that have references that you can find in libraries and things like that. That may take months or up to a year or so, depending on your resources. If it's something like Alclo or Hyperborean, there's no real written references for it, but you might be able to decipher the language itself, using it more or less like cryptograms in a way. Like you might see certain letters or characters written in a certain sequence, and then you might just come up and say, okay, maybe this is what it means, and then,
in a modern campaign, it's very feasible that somebody might have a cryptology skill.
Right.
And cryptology would certainly be able to use to figure that out.
Right.
No.
But it depends. It depends on the methods too.
Cryptology is figuring out
puzzles, ciphers.
It's a puzzle, a cipher. But for instance, if I gave you what do they call, like an acrostic or something like that in English, using cryptology, you could probably solve it pretty easily. If I gave it to you in Arabic, you would look at it and have no concept whatsoever of what it was, because you can't read the Arabic and you don't know what the letter is, and you don't.
But we figured out things like hieroglyphics by doing that very thing.
We only figured out hieroglyphics because we found a Rosetta Stone.
Which translated it.
It had the same thing in hieroglyphics, Greek, and Latin. Without that, we would never have any concept of what the hieroglyphics actually.
Thanks, Greek or Romans.
Greek and Latin.
There is another aspect, part possibly, because I don't know how many people are familiar with Alan Moore's The Courtyard. Which is it's Lovecraftian, but it's you could argue it's non-canonical. But in that, it's the Aklo is treated as a magical language per se, in that it has a fundamental effect on the person's subconscious just by being exposed to it.
Right.
So it's less of a language for explaining things, and it's more of an experience within itself. And
doesn't Alan Moore?
Thomas, it's you can find it in this book.
I need that.
Thomas actually referred to it as an earthly language, but actually.
Well, I was saying like, in reference to earthly languages, unearthly languages like Hybori and then Alco.
Right.
But I believe Alco, literally translated, means something like dark speech or dark language. It's a magical language that when you read it out loud.
It's a language of sorcery. So in that case, you don't really need. Let's say if you were to find the Necronomicon. Mm-hmm. And you were to find the so-called D copy, which is a translation in English. When you get to the Aklo, it simply is phonetically written, the Aklo language, because you need to pronounce it correctly in order for the magic to work.
In that sense, you could argue that it's less of a language in the classical sense, and more just a linguistic tool,
a key,
to enable and engage a magical process.
And it goes back to the concept that when you speak something, you're making sounds that set up vibrations that open up the portal into the other. So it doesn't really matter what it means. It's the sounds that you're making.
Right.
Which, of course, opens that up to where if you say it wrong, then a Bayaki shows up to tear you apart limb from limb.
Now, the other thing I like to toy with, and it kind of mentions this in the book too, is the actual book itself. Is the book itself a living thing? So, like, I like the idea that the moment that you open up the book, because the way that they sort of describe it in the book is kind of like opening up this book is sort of like opening up a door with a fire behind it. And so the moment that you do open up that door, you're going to get hit with the fire. And the moment you dive deeper into the book, it's like you're walking into that room of fire. The idea I like to toy with is when a person sort of opens up this book and starts reading through it, perhaps they are starting to hear the whispers of the text that's being written. And maybe this is how people are able to phonetically come up with the language of like Alclo. And then they're writing it down just by the way it sounds in their head, which also goes into their insanity, because now these dark forces or these outside forces are communicating through this particular book, this little portal, to that individual.
No, that's a cool idea, and I think that works very well.
Well, fits in well that idea of Abdul al-Hazred and the sound of the buzzing of insects.
Right.
Wayne, what I'm curious about is more of a defining of your terminology. Are you saying that the book, never mind what's printed in it, the book itself is a source of magic? Because then it would bring into question, what if I had said book and I Xeroxed it and I put it online, and then in a modern day I'm reading it online? In my opinion, you would still get the sanity loss and all that, because you're getting the meat of the text, but it's just a ghost of the entity of the book.
Right. I mean, now, like in the private game that Tom is running, we've come across printed copies of these different books that they Xerox copied. And it still has these effects, not necessarily the way I'm explaining it, but they still work more or less. And so
you still suffer the sanity loss for reading it.
Right.
Especially if you believe what you're reading.
Right. And that goes into the other thing that it talks about, the believer and the non-believer. Now, I believe Tito, he was saying something about, or it wasn't Tito, it was Jeff, I think. He was saying something about stretching the time between not believing it, that you lost that particular sanity. You still mark it down, but then when it comes back to hit you harder, you lose a larger amount of sanity. You could do that with reading some of these tomes where you don't become a believer. You don't believe in it.
Right.
You know, you read it, you might hear the voices or however you want, the keeper wants to use this particular tome. The player or the character themselves may not actually believe in this stuff, but the moment that they actually come across what's actually written in the book in real life, in real physical form,
Right.
then that thing snaps, their mind snaps, and all that sanity that they would have lost
Right.
comes back.
Yep, that's actually what I was thinking about, and I confused that with the goal sanity loss. That's what you're describing is what I misinterpreted for the regular sanity.
Now, the other thing that you were saying, Wayne, about the book, you could, of course, say that you have a book that's bound in human skin and written in blood,
Right.
and that it's been used in rituals. And at this point in time, the book wants to be read. If the person picking it up cannot read the ancient language that it's written in, the book slowly whispers it in his ears so that he becomes, wow, I suddenly understand what this is saying. And you can always do that. That's lots of, But normally those tomes are just books.
Right. I mean, it's just like it's like the Blood Red Fez, where the Fez itself it was a sort of living thing.
Right.
The moment you put it on your head, you start hearing these whispers and things like that.
Ears, yeah.
Yeah. So these inanimate objects can have a life on their own. But the other question here is, I know, with Call of Cthulhu, sometimes you just come across strange creatures. But when is the best time? When would you guys say is the best time to actually put mythos tomes in your game? Because the way I was describing it and the way it sort of describes it in the book is, you can do a basic reading of it, but you're not really going to get much out of it. In order for you to learn spells and to learn what's actually in the book, you need to take time, and it could take days, weeks, years.
It would be a proper academic study.
Right.
You would have to not just read the text, you'd have to study the text, actually study the text.
Right.
Access is also a problem, because we were talking earlier about comparing the world of H.P. Lovecraft and what the GM wants to do with it. And I'm thinking that some of the things that Lovecraft points out is there is a Greek translation from the Arabic of the Necronomicon in Miskatonic University. There's one in the British Museum, and he may have mentioned some other museum, but there's only 3 of them in the world. And Dr. Henry Armitage is not going to let you just pick up this book and walk away with it.
Right.
On the other hand, lesser tomes like the Vermis Mysterius and Udo Sprechlich and Coulton, you might actually run across one of those in an old bookstore.
Right.
I also think
really fortunate.
I think that at that point in time, we should also discuss the tomes themselves. I mean, it's like there's multiple different copies and versions of the Necronomicon. I mean, you can go down to a bookstore today and buy a paperback copy of the Necronomicon.
Right.
So there's differing levels of the information you're going to gain from it, and it could also throw you off track. If you pick up a paperback copy of the Necronomicon and read it, it's not the same spell-wise sanity loss or general information that you're going to gather from reading, the John Dee version of the Necronomicon.
And then, of course, even when you hit things like the John Dee version, it's always selected excerpts from the original tome. So it's like, what did they purposefully leave out?
Right.
That's why Wilbur Whately was like, I need to find the actual one that's the Miskatonic University.
Well, I think also, I mean, if you look at something like the John Dee translation, what you're getting is you're not getting the al as if, you're getting
Right.
the Necronomicon interpreted through the lens of John Dee's own beliefs and his system of magic.
As if Cliff Notes.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, but
it's any translation.
Is he going to approach John Dee worked with angelic magic, so is he going to treat the elder gods as simply dark angels or something?
Right.
Wayne, to answer your question on where we should kind of bring them in and how we should fit them in, I think it's less up to the GM and the players, even though in Horror on the Orient Express, my character went deliberately looking for it, and Tom did a great way of kind of giving it to me without giving it to me. But I feel the introduction of artifacts is what I'm going to call them. Mythos-related artifacts is completely up to the story.
Right.
Okay.
If it makes no sense for the character to get a hold of the Necronomicon or look at the Necronomicon or any artifact, the Shrine of Yig or the Black Pillar or anything like that, I feel like it's completely up to the story. If you're dealing with Haster, eventually the players are going to come into contact with the King in Yellow play.
Right.
Eventually that will happen because you're dealing with Haster. If you're dealing with Cthulhu, you're eventually going to come into you're going to walk into some guy's house and there's going to be a clay statuette of Cthulhu. And everyone's going to be like, well, what is that? And he's like, I don't know, I just kind of made it one day.
On the other hand of that, on the other side of that is sometimes these games can be very long. We can go for weeks and weeks and weeks playing them. And you can have in reserve, like I did, that the characters go into a major museum or a major library and they roll a 1, looking in the library. And so you might say, well, in reality, in this game, there's nothing in this library that's worth doing. But, I'll throw in Unesh Breklik and Coulton because they're not going to be able to read it. It's going to take them months and months and months and months to read it. And it's not really that important of a text. It doesn't have that much in it that's worth anything. So
now what about like the use of actual magic? Now I remember in Jeb's game, Deadlights and Blackwater Creek. I think my character Cassandra had a high power points, and he asked me on the side, do I want to have some sort of magic? And I was like, sure. So I had a particular power where I was able to persuade other people using a particular type of spell. And there was a particular word that I had to use. And so I mixed it in with like a prayer to a saint that I would do. And I would just, chant that word at the end of it, and the spell would work. And I think I was only able to use it once. But I know that there are other players out there who see that Call of Cthulhu has a magic system and they want to be able to at least try the magic out. How do you guys feel about putting a little bit more magic in
I think that it's a very steep slope there because yes, there is magic, but almost all magic causes you to lose sanity. Now, as a player, you might cast a spell one time, but once you realize that it's got that shock to your system, are you going to be as willing to cast it the next time? And unlike D&D, where you just go, boom, fireball. I mean, some of these spells take days. And if you're losing sanity from it, who can imagine what kind of spell components you're going to have for this thing?
Right.
Well, there's actually another thing, and that's you have to understand the difference between your power roll and your magic points.
Right.
And being able, they affect one another. Your magic points are what you usually expend to do this. What power is, I always thought that it shouldn't be called power.
It should be like willpower,
because it's your willpower.
Right.
And what the assumption usually is that these things magic is a perversion of the natural world. So every time you use it, you are sacrificing a little bit of your willpower to something outside the natural realm, and that's why it's damaging you. Sometimes it'll say it's going to cost you 3 power, and when you lose power, that's permanent. You don't ever get power back. You're becoming more and more of a zombie the more magic you use, because you're sacrificing your will to this outside force. Magic points then you can regain, but
right.
That's how much energy is going out of you.
Yeah, it's like a piece of your soul being used.
I do think
bad thing.
I do think though that within the confines of Call of Cthulhu, that because power is fleeting and you can expend it on a permanent basis, if you think about it from the perception of, say, a cultist who does this on a daily basis, who's casting these spells and summoning these creatures, I think that they're going to have to pull their power from something else, like a human sacrifice or what have you, because if they're giving up their own power, they didn't survive long enough to become this uber powerful wizard that you're fighting in the story.
You could also argue that let's say you have a cultist wizard, so to speak,
or sorcerer. Yeah,
he has given his will over to the darkness. He has lost all of his sanity in the process. He's stark raving mad, but he's functional. He functions because his insanity is he's worshiping the thing that's going to bring about the end of the world.
Right.
He's not only he's completely devoted to it. That's his willpower is gone. He couldn't.
That's his insanity too. Yeah,
he couldn't change now if he wanted to.
Right. He's a complete slave to whatever.
He's a complete slave to it.
Right.
I think even if the cultist is going to use the life force and the power of human sacrifices to enable these spells, the first time they do it, it's essential that they should be losing their own power.
Right.
There should be this sense of shock, and there should be this idea that the very first time that you use magic, especially for player characters, the very first time that they use magic, there should be a very strong sense that by using this, you have on some other plane just lit up like a beacon.
Right.
You're a flare in the darkness, and something will have noticed you doing that.
Right.
There needs to be a consequence. The first time they use magic, there is a consequence. You've just used magic. You've enabled this force. Something has seen you do that somewhere.
Something that also in the Call of Cthulhu universe that gives us an advantage. The players have an advantage over the darkness, and that is cultists, cult leaders are insane, and they're doing this for their own psychological needs. So you're very rarely going to find two cultist leaders that cooperate with one another, except if one thinks he's going to gain the advantage over the other one and be able to ultimately get rid of him so that he can have it all. They're crazy. They're mad with power. So,
and also realize that different cultists who worship different outsiders, will probably more likely be opposed to one another anyway, because maybe those outsiders hate each other too.
And that means that a lot of times they don't succeed.
Right.
Their own
their own worst enemy. Yeah. Now, speaking about like certain effects, I like the idea, and I don't think this was written in the book, but like I like the idea that when an individual uses magic, especially from one of these tomes, that it leaves some sort of mark, not just on them, but also in the area that they cast that spell. So like in Canis Mysterium, when I forget his name, but the guy that you guys ended up taking out, when he cast the spell that ripped open the temporal rip, it left a scar in the fabric of reality, basically. So things can come from the outside through that area. There are darker things that happen in that particular town now because of
The
it.
Hounds of Tindalos.
Yeah.
Well, there's one of my favorite stories is the gable window, and unless you say the right spell and do the right ritual to open up the portal, the portal is closed, and yet the guy living in the house constantly hears scratching at the walls from the other side of the thing that knows there's a window here somewhere and can't quite find it, can't get through unless he opens it.
Right.
So yeah, it's definitely changes.
Well,
the world.
that brings in the whole notion, not only people learning spells, but being tricked or lured into learning spells at the behest of something else on the other side.
Right.
Could you translate this for me and read it out loud to me?
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing suddenly comes through the window and tears him to shreds.
Well, and also keep in mind that an investigator who is a normal investigator, say you've got a fireman who's playing your game, he doesn't know anything about the occult, he doesn't know anything about the Cthulhu mythos and all this, he's not necessarily going to understand what the outcome of a given spell will do.
Right.
So it's all mysterious. So when he sees contact Narlothep, I mean, he's thinking, oh, what's this? And so he does it, and then he proceeds to lose D100 sanity. I mean,
Yeah. Or just opens up a can of hurt that'll follow him for a long time. It doesn't necessarily. So like with something like Nyarlathotep, you can say instead of a person losing 1D100, they'll lose the amount that they would have if they read the tome, but then that has effects that might linger throughout the entire investigation. The other thing I wanted to talk on is, because we already sort of talked about how to cast this. Well, we haven't really talked about how to cast a spell, but when you do cast it, you got to put in some of your willpower, but you also have the magic points. The book also says that when you're out of magic points, you start taking physical damage. The way I personally would like to do it is maybe there's a particular physical change that is tied in with that particular outsider, or elder being, or Cthulhu monster. So for an example, the person might start having tentacles or something like that. They might lose an arm, and their arm turns into more or less like a tentacle. So they're permanently disfigured, and they've got this thing here, or something they have an extra eye popping out of their cheek or something like that.
No worries, I'll just move to Innsmouth.
But something like that, I think, especially when you're using this type of magic, there should be some permanent type of effect that you can't just hide, Well,
or like I mentioned earlier, mispronounce the words in Aklo, and
then something else. Yeah. Exactly.
Can I, as a guy whose show is literally called Elder Sign, can I ask feelings about the Elder Sign as a magical, spell? To me, the Elder Sign, because we've been talking a lot about this dark magic.
Mm-hmm.
To me, the Elder Sign constitutes what I consider to be good magic. It's magic of the Elder Gods.
Well,
the question,
I'm not sure I'd say the Elder Gods as good.
I would say that you're going to have to learn that Elder Sign from someplace, a Mythos tome. So you're still going to take that sanity loss, but to cast it, that would be like a Catholic in the sign of the cross. I mean, you're dispelling the monsters and holding them at bay. So I wouldn't think that would be any form of derogative loss to sanity or anything.
You're still losing. You're still going to be losing the power. Yeah. Although it doesn't say anything about losing. Well, it does. So it costs 10 power to cast that. So
my main question was, my main train of thought was, with using the Elder Sign, because Jeff, everybody has kind of brought up the fact that by casting magic, it's kind of like lighting a spark in the dark. By casting, in my mind, it's like in casting evil magic, it's like casting a light that says, "Hey, we've got this. We don't really know what we're doing. Come manipulate us." But by casting an elder sign or a sign similar to it, it's like saying, "Hey,
Stay the hell away.
Stay the hell away. I know what I'm doing. I'll keep you away. I'll keep you out."
Here's the thing, though. The idea. I like what you're saying, but it's first. I will say that it's up to the keeper how they want to run that. For me, I would look at it as if the elder sign had to come from somewhere. Maybe the elder sign is used by the outsiders to hold other outsiders at bay, more or less. It might be their version of a magic shield or something like that. So the language and the magic itself is still coming from outside. And so it still light up that beacon in the darkness. Now, what it will do is, let's say for an example, you have an outsider coming in and you throw up the elder sign. That beacon gets lit. That outsider will look at you and their focus will be on that particular character. And when that sign goes down, they know when to attack them, So you're still lighting that beacon, but it's just kind of like, yeah, I got my protection up now. My shields are raised now, but eventually they may falter or we might be outside of it. Yeah.
Well, I mean, they can, if the elder sign's up, they can't get through. If it isn't, they can.
I personally...
Essentially, it's like electricity. You can use electricity to run a life support machine or to use an electric chair. But either way, that power is still there. It's still going to be noticed.
Now here's the thing with the elder sign. Now, every GM looks at it differently. I've always thought of the elder sign as a very specific object. It's a small green soapstone in the shape of a star with hieroglyphics written on it, and it's used to disrupt or keep. You can use it to disrupt. Let's say if somebody's trying to port through, you can stop that from happening. It's usually meant as a seal. It seals an area to keep it safe from whatever. But it's not something that you can make. It's something that somebody millions of years ago made, and
so like you couldn't get it tattooed. You couldn't get it tattooed on your skin. And hold them.
That's just ink on skin. It's
they're also called the Star Stones of Mnar.
Right.
The book though has a slightly different
take on it.
Yeah, you can create a medallion and wear it around your neck.
Yeah, so, and to me, because I'm going to be honest here, no one watches my show, so who cares?
Oh, come on.
I've watched the show.
All right, so to me, it's the elder sign is it's like to me the elder sign is like a swastika. Okay, when you see a swastika, what is the very first thing you think of?
Buddha.
To me,
says the anthropologist.
Yeah, to me, it immediately Nazi Germany. I imagine the Holocaust as a Jew. Right. I imagine death and fear. But the thing is the swastika is just a symbol.
Right.
All the feelings that are with it, they're just feelings because of what the symbol, means. I feel like the elder sign is similar. That the elder sign, all it is a symbol, and that these things fear the symbol, what it's associated with, whether that be the elder gods or a different god or whatever. But they're afraid of it and they steer clear of it.
I think though that you have to rationalize why. And I could see if it's an object that's millions of years old, created by the elder gods, that it's made of something or it has some property that causes a disruption in this.
No, it does though.
But
you've sacrificed your power. You've sacrificed your power, making it a magical object. In much the same way.
That makes sense too.
You can have a cross and go to a vampire and hold the cross up. If you're Jewish, you don't have any faith in that cross. Therefore, the vampire just goes.
Right.
But now
I mean,
something else that was mentioned was, when you do this, does anything notice? Imagine being in a gym with a bunch of people and the lights are off. And one guy suddenly turns on a flashlight. Even though the other people in this gym are terrified of light, they acknowledge that the light was turned on. So while they may not directly attack you, they're going to start watching you, because this guy knows something and he may not know enough, and then we could sneak in there.
So it
so
comes
they'll-
down to however the GM wants to treat them.
and basically like saying how the like certain tomes are alive and that they can take on a mind of their own, and they can whisper in the ears and the mind of the reader, even if it's been Xerox copied. It still has that level of power, depending on how the keeper wants to play it. I would say that creating an elder sign has a similar effect. Again, you're putting in the book, it has you actually losing power points in order to use it or cast the spell or create an object to do that. So you're putting part of your willpower into that thing. So to me, it would make sense, especially from Tito's perspective, it would make sense that you can create something like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be new. And I like the idea of, like what Jerry was saying, if a person who's of Jewish faith held up a cross to a vampire but has no faith in a cross, then it has no effect on the vampire. Now, if he held up a Star of David because he has the faith in the Star of David, it has a similar effect as a cross would to a Christian holding up to a vampire.
That's once again open to interpretation.
Well,
I think
my immediate question would be, what happens if you hold a cross up to a Jewish vampire?
Well,
The point was it's not the object, it's the power you're imbibing into it to make it a magical object. If you're making a ritual dagger, you sacrifice your power into it, thus making this normal tabletop butcher knife into a magical object. You're imbibing it with power, giving part of your soul. I mean, and that's what essence willpower would be. It's part of your soul over to it. Now, yes, it is open to Game Master's interpretation. Almost everything is.
See, I think that since we're dealing with it, it's a question in the Lovecraftian universe, does magic exist? And I would say in the classical sense, no, it doesn't. There is no magic. Saying a magical spell doesn't do anything. Having a magical symbol or an object doesn't do anything. But these things like these elder signs, they're not magical. They're part of a technology that we're just not in possession of. The fact that I could recite that Aklo spell sets up those vibrations to open up the gate. It's not magic. It's elder science, if you will.
Yeah.
In that respect, Lovecraft is very much science fiction, isn't it?
Right. But then that's, and like this divide here is like sort of the divide that Ralph and Hero had between magic and science, And in this universe, it could be actually the same. We call it magic. It could be a science to them.
I think that the problem is that once you accept magic, now you have to deal with magic in the game.
Right. That was another thing I was going to touch on too, because the book talks about this type of mythos, quote unquote magic or science, if you will, and then you have the mundane, the non-mythos type of magic. And should that exist? And could that exist, and does it exist in Call of Cthulhu?
Yeah.
I
think not.
You could possibly argue that some human belief systems may have sort of syncretized certain aspects of that mythos technology over generations in a very diluted and usually, in comparison to the mythos magic, quite ineffectual way. You might be able to slightly influence someone in a persuasive manner.
In my viewpoint, calling it science fiction makes my viewpoint more plausible because I create the elder sign, reference it back to I make a flashlight. My willpower is the battery that I put into the flashlight. Thus, I now have a working flashlight. If it was magic, then you're having to deal with things outside the realm of normality. But science fiction, you're creating this symbol, you're imbibing it with a certain amount of willpower, which sets up that resonance to make it
Actually
an object of power.
Right.
But then that goes into like with mundane magic or non-mythos magic, it could be thought of as the same, where you're pouring your willpower into something happening. Now, does it happen? Should it happen? Could it happen? I think it's up to the keeper. But I mean, along those lines, it could, I mean, there's room to.
The thing is that how do you pour your willpower into something? I mean, it's by what mechanism? I can see something like, let's say, the blood red fez sucking your life out of you,
right?
When you've done it. Anyways, you are correct. It depends on the game master. I personally, I like to think of it all as science that we don't understand, but it looks like magic, and the gods are not really gods. They're interdimensional aliens.
Well, I think part of the sanity laws attached with magic comes from the fact that the player is doing something that they don't entirely understand or really expect to work.
Right.
So the shock of it working and the complete non-comprehension of what they're doing on a structural level.
I think also the other side of that. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was pretty much finished then.
Well, I was going to say the opposite end of that too is the sanity loss, that one discovers that all of my Christian beliefs don't mean anything.
Right.
I can pray all I want to. This is not personal. This is just in the game. I can pray all I want to God, and He's not going to save my friends from the things that are about to tear them to shreds.
Right.
And yet the book over there said that those things were going to tear them to shreds. The book's right, and I'm wrong. That's a sanity.
Right. I mean, I'm pretty much done with the magic portion. Okay. So if you wanted to move on,
so let's talk about stats and skills. And
Tom, can I just?
Yeah.
Sorry, I tend to jump in late. Apologies.
No, that's okay.
Good.
I just wanted to say real quick that the times that I enjoyed that really immensely, Wayne, trying to figure out a good spell for you to use, and we sort of invented our own, and we just did everything not out of the book.
Yeah.
I will say though that it was incredibly hard and difficult to do that. And I was so afraid that it was just going to completely break the game.
Yeah.
So my just advice is, if you're a keeper and you want to use magic, just be very careful, because each one of these spells can be game breaking.
Oh, sure. Right. Sure.
So,
but you also have to have a good. I mean, I'm not calling myself a good player, but I mean,
yeah,
it's for me. I didn't want to constantly use it. It was something that would be if I got myself in a tough spot, and I think I only used it in the second half, and I was like, so. Damn it, we spent some time with this. I want to use it at least once,
Yep, exactly.
But you can go a full game without even using one spell.
Cool.
I think there should be always be the chance with magic that it is going to go catastrophically wrong.
Right.
Yeah, I think that magic is another one of those where pushing the dice roll could be very, very dangerous.
Or maybe you shouldn't be allowed to ever push the dice roll.
That was one other thing that I did want to mention that was in the book, and it talks about when you're doing a full-on study. And as you're doing your full-on study, if you fail your interpretation roll, your Cthulhu Mythos roll, you can push it. But if you fail that, then not only do you not really interpret it right, but there might be some sort of residual.
No, you severely
effects.
damage your own brain.
Not just that, but like you might call up something by accident,
Right.
or something else might happen. So it's always interesting if you're going to put that into your games to have that portion work. But I think with Magic, the main thing about Magic is it works in a long story as opposed to like a short scenario.
Well, I think one last thing about Magic. We are the GMs, and we're talking tonight from the GM's point of view. Magic is bad, and it should be put into a game as a temptation for the players.
Right.
But when you see that player suddenly embracing it and diving into it and really going for that magic, then there are consequences.
Oh yes,
I think also
really
it should be primarily the preserve of the antagonist as well, rather than the player.
Uh-huh.
I love the way that you introduced the whole magic thing and the game that we've been playing, because my character didn't believe in it, and then the moment that he did that, which increased his strength and stamina, he felt great. And then the next day, temporarily, right. And then the next day, and then he loses Constitution constantly every time he uses that spell. So it's not like it comes for free, and that's permanent loss too. Right. So I like it, and you used it as a temptation,
right?
Because it did give him a nice boost in strength and stamina and Constitution and everything, but it comes at a price, and now he's actually hooked on this thing.
The same with magical tomes you find in the library. They're a temptation to.
Bottom line is I think Magic is a great hook,
right?
But little more than that. I mean, if you've got a player whose the whole intents and purposes in the game is that they want to be a Magic user, they need to be on the other side of the screen.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. So let's talk about stats for a second. When our players are creating their characters, GMs need to work with them a lot. There's always a tendency for a character to go overboard with the stats. And we play a game that's very much on the honor system. I suppose theoretically when you roll up your stats, you could accidentally roll 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, 90, but who wants to play that kind of a character?
Right.
It's an insane kind of character. I approach the stats as if 50% was the average for human beings. So if you have an education of 50%, well, you pass high school and you probably got a year or two of community college, and that's about it for you. Or if you are, if you have an appearance of 50, then you're just an average everyday person like most of us are. You're not stunning and you're not ugly. You're just average, and that goes for all of them. Of course, we always let people have more than our characters are a little bit above average usually. One of the stats that I think is probably the one that people play around with the most is education and intelligence.
Mm-hmm.
Because we all know that the more education we have, the more skill points we get. More intelligence, the more hobby points, if you will, we get. My opinion is I've always made it a general rule that you can have a higher intelligence than you have education. However, you can't have a higher education than you have intelligence.
Right.
It doesn't make any
sense.
sense.
And that makes sense. That makes perfect sense there.
Because education's dealing with what you have learned, not that you sat through the class and didn't pay any attention and got an F in the class. That doesn't count. That's not what we're going for. And then, of course, the skills, people can distribute those however they will. my personal way of dealing with character creation is, I think, since it's all in the honor system anyway, and I think there's a lot of leeway that you can give character creation as long as they're not creating supermen. I think that they should pick their occupation first. What do you want to be? Then they should put those skill points and stat points the way that a doctor, or let's say if you want to be a doctor, that's what a doctor would have. He'd have a high education and intelligence, and if he's a surgeon, he would have a high dexterity, but he might not be very good looking. You can balance it out that way. I also think that when you're putting skill points in, I do think that you can fudge it a little bit. You should use the points that you get, but it would seem that if you're a doctor, you're going to have high medical, and if you've got, you're going to want to distribute those that make sense. And there's a few occupations I've run into, and I can't think of any offhand, where they would know quite a few skills, but they don't have enough skill points to distribute them. So I'm always like, it's just, obviously your character knows how to swim, so go ahead and put 60 points in swim. I don't care, because when it comes down to it, it's not so much a dice rolling game, it's a character game.
Yeah, I never understood climb. I mean, climb is one of those kinds of skills that it should pretty much be standardized that you know how to climb.
Well,
or drive a car.
It depends. Like climbing a ladder, yes, that makes sense. Like you lean a ladder up against a wall, you climb up. That should be no big deal. Anybody, a little kid can do that. Climbing a rope or coming down, climbing a wall or something like that, that's different. Right. So I think I think that when it comes to using something like a ladder, like a regular step ladder or something like that, you shouldn't have to climb. But now, if you're using a rope ladder, which is tricky, right? Then yeah, something like that. Or if you're going to
climb a tree.
Or if you're going to climb a tree or something.
In our game, my character was a lumberjack. He had high climb, because he climbs trees.
Yeah, well, you should have climbed that ladder instead of letting Danny climb up.
I was going to, but she just went up the ladder, and she came down again.
I've always had a problem with the modern character sheet. I've always had a problem with the extremely low base for computer use. Which maybe if it was a 90s character, then fair enough. But with a modern character,
I think that because in the game that that Tom is running for Jeff and I think that particular scenario was written in the 90s. He had to actually update it to modern day. So I think the computer use for that was set for computer use in the 90s.
Right. I had to update that whole scenario because there were things like, oh, and you find all these VHS tapes. And I'm like, no.
What's a VHS?
and you could
get some sort of venereal disease?
You could get the police to get the phone company to trace the modem line so that you could find out where. And I was like, oh my God. Yeah. So.
Now the way I usually roll characters, I use the rules that's in the quick guide. Where they give you the certain amount of points that you do, 170, 160,
40, 50, 50, 50, 60, 60, 70, 80.
Right. And that's how I put my points. And it depends on the type of character I'm rolling, like for an example with Liara, she had a high appearance look because that's, she was a model. So, but she had standard intelligence, like a basic intelligence, basic education or something like that. So you can move those points around depending on the type of character that you want. You don't want your model to be like super strong unless they're a bodybuilder, or super smart, because that's not what you
never super anything.
Right.
I really don't think anybody should have an education above 80, which is a PhD.
Right. Yeah. Unless they're a PhD.
A 90 is an Albert Einstein.
Right. I never.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've encountered people in the past who've had characters who were like 25 years old with an education of 95.
Yeah.
And it's just not credible.
Right.
I mean, what you said before about education and intelligence, I wouldn't want to name any names, but I mean, as an academic, I've met people who have a very high level of intelligence, a very high level of education, but their applied intelligence outside of their specific field,
right,
minimal.
Right.
Yeah, actually, Tom, I think I'm going to disagree with you, if I'm allowed to do that.
Of course you are.
To a degree.
I'm allowed to rebuttal too.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, so I just want to. So education, your stat for education, is strictly supposed to be applied to basically your college level, your educational level. Mm-hmm. So a 60 is high school graduate. A 70 would be college graduate, bachelor degree. 80 is a degree for master's. 90 would be a doctorate. So I could theoretically see your intelligence, within reason. You could be average intelligence, maybe a 60, but still working really hard and gaining like a master's degree. So like I could see you have a 60 intelligence and an 80 education.
Logically, that makes sense.
Well, my argument against that is what those particular stats are used for in the game.
Right.
And education is used for how many skill points you get to use for your profession. So it has to do, it's not directly with intelligence, but it is, because how could you have a 90, let's say, in education of being a doctor and not be highly intelligent? You wouldn't have been able to make it through the school.
The way I, like, for an example, I have Hero's character sheet here. I've got a 70 in education, but an 80 in intelligence. And the way I did it, now the way I did it was because he's a biologist. That was his focus. He didn't really focus on any of the other things. He's a doctor, but so he doesn't have a 90, doesn't even have an 80. But for me, it's because his focus, his educational focus, was biology, and so
he has 80 points. What is it? 70 points.
70 points.
He has 70 points for his education, which is biochemistry. Right. Intelligence, he has more, and of course, you only get 2 times intelligence. That's the rest of his knowledge. Does he know how to take care of fish in a fish tank? Does he know how to dry, that sort of thing? And for me, I tend to balance it. Like if I play highly, if I play like a highly intelligent character, like a hero, I balance it or counterbalance it with a very low social skill. So he spent a lot of time in the lab. He spent a lot of time working on that, but he doesn't really go out and mingle with other people. So he doesn't have those social skills. And so for me, it's like, even if you pour a lot of points into one particular skill or attribute, you counterbalance it with something else that you may need in the game, like social. I think I could also accept what Jeff and Mick say, because what if you have an extremely high education in, let's say, biochemistry, but that's all you've ever done? And intelligence is your other skills, and you don't have any. Also, let's take the case of, he didn't have a particularly high level of education, but his education was higher than his intelligence. But my character in Open Casket, who had an average level of intelligence, and his education, I think his intelligence was 50, his education was 60, but he wasn't an academic, he was a chef. Mm-hmm. So you have skills that are not academic skills, that are not intellectual skills. You have skills that are physical skills. But being a chef, a lot of that is dexterity or innate skill, even as well. Right. And if someone's learned to rock climb to a very high standard, that's not necessarily. Yes, it involves intelligence because you're going to need to remember things, learn skills.
knows certain ways of doing things, but there's also an innate physical component to it as well.
Well, also keep in mind that, okay, you've got your points that are derived from intelligence, you've got your points that are derived from education, but you also have a limiting factor of your occupation. So your occupation, like for instance here, let's just use a musician. He's got a limited number of skills that he can choose from: arts and crafts, an instrument, one interpersonal skill, charm, fast talk, intimidate, or persuade, listen, psychology, and any 4 other skills. Well, if you take and add in a ton of points to your character, and you're dividing it up against this, well, I mean, it's going to leave your character pretty much unbalanced. I mean, you could play a guitar great, but what are you going to do against a great old one? I mean, you're going to play music to them?
That's where your intelligence comes in. Your intelligence gives you skills anywhere you want to put them.
Well, right. That's where I want to kind of jump in. I've been very kind of quiet because what we're talking about is mainly mechanical. And as a GM, not as a player, but as a GM, I'm very, 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 very roleplay heavy when it comes to my games. And so I believe that in making a character sheet, it shouldn't be like, well, what should I do if I meet a Gug and it's got 4 arms and I got 1 gun, and I have a knife in one hand. No, it should be, well, I'm this person who's lived their entire life up to this point doing normal things.
Mm-hmm.
For a musician, he's made his entire life as a musician because that's what he's wanted to do. Day one. And then just one day out of the blue, this thing happens. And so, yeah, maybe being a violinist doesn't come into play, but maybe in a scenario, luck happens to prevail and your violin, like Enric Zahn, is the only thing keeping the things at bay.
Well, no, what I'm more referring to is that because you're limited to those skills to spend that education on, even if you give yourself 100 in education, you're breaking it down into a very small number of skills. Right. So it doesn't matter if you have a high education, you're still limited into those tiny list of skills, so which most of them don't come into play.
When it comes down to it, I guess what we are talking about is the GM's perspective, he's dealing with the players who are creating these characters. Right. So we want to encourage them, correct, to you only get to use those skills in those specific fields, and then you can use the intelligence fields wherever you want.
Right. The hobby points.
I think that the thing that we all have to deal with often is when we get the player who sends us their sheet and they've got outrageous numbers.
Right. I think the best way, and I mean, like, my suggestion to players is don't think about putting all these points into everything. Think about what you're right. Well, think about what you want your character to be. For an example, when I rolled Liara, she was a photographer / model. She has no real library skills. She has no fighting skills or anything like that. She's a normal person. This game is not about superheroes. This game is about normal people who come across some weird shit. And that's the way you should be creating your character. You should be thinking about, okay, I'm going to be a librarian, or I'm going to be a model, or I'm going to be a baseball player. Put your points into those things, and then have, for an example, after you put your points into, say, we don't have athletics, but some sort of skill or whatever, craft or art. You put your points into those things, and then you say, all right, now where are my hobbies? I like cars, so I can, I race car drive or something like that. So you pour points into that. But don't think about it as, what am I going to need in order to play this game?
Right.
Think about it as, what type of life did this particular character live?
That's what you get from people who are used to playing Dungeons and Dragons. I'm going to create a character that's super powerful.
Right. And that's what they call min-maxing.
The skills aren't there for the players to play Call of Cthulhu. The skills are there to establish the structure of the player. So, like, for example, the character that I've got for Wednesday for Crimson Letters.
Yeah.
He's got quite a good spot hidden, and he's got
he's got a kick-ass accounting.
He's got rather good persuade, but he's got a really excellent accounting and law and appraisal. They're all great because he's an insurance investigator. Yeah. But the chances of him using those skills are very slim. But nonetheless, that's true to the character. Those are the skills that that character should and would have.
And so, honestly, like I was saying earlier, if somebody wants to spend 400 points, even if they don't have 400 points, but it makes sense for that character, so they're not creating a Superman. They're just they're a dilettante, and the dilettante knows how to paint, knows how to play music, knows how to ride horses, and knows how to drive a car because they got a car and they've got all it. Makes sense. Okay, fine. And that's where it's always a thing between the GM and the player. The GM should definitely look over the player's things. And if they're a baseball player and they've got a 93 in spot hidden, it's like, okay, dude, come on.
Right. If they are an investigator for a living, like a private eye or detective or something like that, they should definitely have spot hidden. It has to make. For me, it's like it has to make sense for that type of character. A librarian would have a high library use skill, but probably have a very low climbing skill or charm or whatever, or first aid. A doctor would have definitely, like an EMT or something like that, would definitely have a high first aid skill. Maybe even some points in medicine, because this is their field. Whereas
Now we talked about the difference between first aid and medical,
right?
But there's a couple of these other things here that we should talk about the differences in really quickly. You have persuade, intimidate, and charm. And if you take them for the word that they are,
fast talk.
Fast talk, yeah. Mm-hmm. Charm is a pretty girl distracting a guy with her looks, or vice versa, in order to, sweet talk them into something. Persuade is to give somebody a good argument as to why you need something. I need that because, we're going to die if you don't get what that's not a really good example, but you know what I mean. Fast talk is when the police come up and they say, what the hell are you doing here? And you need to make up a really quick story that's going to sound plausible and convince them not to haul you off into jail. That's fast talking. And then what was the other one? Intimidate. Well, that's bullying somebody into complying. I think those are all very, very different, but we tend to get them all mixed up.
Yeah, but I mean, and they can sort of be fluent too. So, for an example, persuasion and intimidate. Let's say I'm a door-to-door salesman, and I'm knocking on your door, and I really need to make this sell because the end of the month is coming, and I just need to make my quarter. Now I knock on your door, and I'm trying to persuade you to buy my product, and you're like, "Well, no, thank you." And I'm, this is the last house on the block. End of the day, I need to make a sale, and I'm not taking no for an answer. So if I try to persuade and I'll say, okay, you're like, all right, roll a persuade roll. And I do, and I fail that. And the person's about to shut the door in my face. Can I then roll and intimidate by putting my foot in the door and say, no, you really need this, and you're going to buy this from me, whether you want to or not.
Realistically, do you think that would ever work? And they wouldn't just call the police on you immediately?
I think.
I mean, realistically, that might go through your mind. But if the person is really desperate to get. And I mean, I'm just using this
I
one
think
example.
they might try to persuade harder. They might try to push that persuade roll by saying, all right, well, if you really don't think that you need it, but your next door neighbor bought it and they're going to be ahead of you, you're still just persuading.
I think there's a level. Sorry.
I was just going to say intimidate would be like saying, listen here, you're going to buy this damn thing or I'm going to shove it up your ass.
Yeah.
That's intimidation.
Yeah.
That's forcing it on.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'm going to make you an offer you can't refuse.
That's intimidation. That's definitely intimidation.
Okay.
Can I?
Force. Yeah, go ahead, Tom.
So, can I say that with intimidate and persuade and charm and fast talk, this is also kind of a tip for you guys playing Crimson Letters next Wednesday, or this Wednesday. With me, whenever anyone's like, "Can I do a persuade?" I always say, "Well, say what you're going to say and do what you're going to do," and then they do it. I always, if it's realistic, like if there's like I can picture it in my head, and if they say it the right way, I may be like, okay, here's a bonus dice because like.
Right, that's a good argument. It's a good argument.
It's a good argument. You intimidated me. That's a decent lie. They're a friend of yours. They'd believe you. Or if it's just some batshit stupid, like you run up to a guy and you grab him by the shirt and you're like, "You're gonna give me your car right now because I say so." I'm gonna be like, "Well, he's a stranger on the street. Do a negative. Do a penalty roll or a penalty die." I mean, is that just me or is that kind of everyone?
No, I think that's
sense.
It makes sense.
That's the finessing that the GM can do because
I've always assumed that NPCs are on a straight line. They're living their life.
Yeah.
So when you're trying any of these four things on an NPC, you're trying to divert them from what they were going to do in the first place. You're trying to move them towards your position. So I think sorry.
Go ahead. Well,
I was like so charm and persuade have very much an interchangeability and a commonality.
Right.
If you're charming someone, you're trying to win them over with wit and insouciance, or just by being a pretty girl, or a charming gentleman, or whatever.
Yeah.
And persuasion, you're using a logical argument to bring them around, and those are quite positive things. You're trying to you're just trying to get them onto your side, but then when you move into the realms of fast talk and intimidation, that's much more confrontational. Intimidation, obviously, but with fast talk, I've always thought of fast talk as being more flim flam, more
used car salesman.
You're trying to scam someone into doing what you want. But that's a lot more difficult to role play as well.
Yeah,
I think that the flim flammery is still persuading. It's trying to persuade somebody. I have always thought of fast talk as trying to get out of a situation or get into a situation by making up a whole bunch of fast talk. You're bullshitting.
So you're thinking on your feet.
You're trying to you're trying to bullshit your way through it so that you can get them to.
That makes sense.
Yeah, but then I mean I can see where they cross over though, because with fast talk, if I'm trying to get you to do something for me, there may not be any sort of logical explanation for it. But I'm going to feed you some bullshit in order for you to... So it's me lying to you, basically. Whereas persuasion is using actual logic. Saying, this works because of this, that, and the other, So there's that difference. One is lying. The other one is actually using logical arguments in order to... You could be completely wrong in your logic. But
Let's think if we can let's say, okay, your character needs to get into a nightclub.
Right.
So charm. They go up to the guy who's letting people in and flirts with him a little bit, and that you're trying to charm them into letting you into the club.
Right.
Okay. Persuade. You go up there and you're like, well, I'm waiting in line and it's my turn and I'd like to go in now. You've given them a logical argument why you should be let in.
Right.
intimidate. Listen here, buddy, let me into the club right now or I'm going to punch you in the face. Or maybe it's like, I've been waiting here for over an hour and it's my turn to go in.
Hey, I know your boss.
I know.
You want to keep your job? You let me in.
That's the fast talk. The fast talk is, but I'm friends with Justin Bieber. Please, he's expecting me. You need to let me.
Dude, I should definitely be on that list. They told me I was going to be on that list.
Do you know who I am?
Yeah, exactly. That's
fast talk. Yeah,
that's fast talking. Yeah,
because that's a lie, more or less.
And actually, it shouldn't really be up to. How do I word this? Shouldn't be up to the player to decide that, but rather when you created your character, you only chose probably one, maybe two of those skills. So, for example, if I have a low appearance, I'm not going to want to choose charm.
Right.
So it's like you kind of have to let your character sheet guide you as to what skill you're intending to use.
Which is why I always... It's why I always say, say what you're going to say or do what you're going to do beforehand, because because players will, because sometimes players, and I kind of we were on stats, and I want to bring something up, but I'll do it after I say this. That's why players will sometimes be like, oh, I want to persuade. When we're in the moment, I want them to say what they're going to say and do what they're going to do, and then I'll say it's a persuade, it's a fast talk, it's a charm.
That's much more correct. Yes. What exactly are you going to try to argue? What are you going to do?
Well, I'm not going to. They should role play it first, and then you should determine the appropriate role that they should make based on what they've done.
If you can move the players away from referring to the roles, I'm going to use my skill. You get them to say, what are you going to do exactly? What are you going to do? And then you tell them, then do this role.
Can I offer one slight, if my character chooses fast talk, there is absolutely no way I'm going to be able to role play fast talk. I am not a fast talker. So I think there's a certain limit of, it is a game, and at some point you could say, I would like to fast talk the bouncer to let me in. Well, what are you going to say? Oh, I don't quite know. I'm kind of depending on the dice roll to, what I'm saying?
The police want to know what you're doing here, and you say, well, I'm going to make up an excuse to see if I can get them to believe me.
Yeah.
All right. Go faster.
Yeah. If you're just not comfortable doing a role play like that, then I'd be like,
okay.
That's
fine. And I get exactly what Jeff is saying, because there are times where you're thinking about, well, what exactly would I say in order to fast talk?
Sure. Our characters are more intelligent sometimes than we are.
Right. So so I get that. I totally get that. But the other skill that I guess we should talk about is psychoanalyst and psychology.
Right,
because they're pretty similar, but they're different.
Well, psychology specifically is: are you able to read this other person?
Right,
what they might be thinking. And psychoanalysis is: are you able to help this person based on your?
I don't know.
Psychologist.
I would think that if I'm trying to get into the club and Tom is the bouncer, I would think that the psychology role would be a predecessor to fast talk or persuade, because I'm trying to read his mood and intention to see what would work best. Then I role play, and Tom's reaction is the dice roll. I'm saying, I'm going to take and I'm going to use charm. And then the dice roll comes into play of his reaction, and it could be based on how well I role played it.
My interpretation of psychology, when it comes into terms of NPCs using psychology on PCs and PCs using it on themselves, is that psychology is used when a player says, "I want to do a fast talk on this NPC," and NPC makes a counter psychology roll to the fast talk.
Correct. That's right.
Because that's the whole, because he's lying, and psychology is used to determine whether or not he's lying or not. And I believe it's essentially, because I grew up on D&D, it's essentially a sense motive role.
But could you not also say, I look at Tom and I get the impression with my psychology role that he doesn't have a lot of self-assuredness. So
Yeah.
I fast talk him or persuade him into what a great job he's doing, and and I gain his trust and then get into that door that way.
Sure.
Yeah. It's like I said, it's a mixture. To me, it's a mixture of a perception and a sense motive.
But I like what you're saying, Tito, about the opposed roles, because to me that kind of works. It's like if I come up to you and I'm fast talking, or let's say Liara comes up to you, you're the guard, and she tries to charm you. You should be able to roll the psychology to say, is she really interested in me, or is she just trying to get into the club?
Yeah.
But why go to all that trouble? If they come up and they try to fast talk me and they succeed, then they succeed.
I don't know.
Why do I try to counteract it with a random roll?
I'd also like to point out that we should always bear in mind that psychology isn't telepathy.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
It doesn't. You don't get a magical insight. You have an impression of their motivation.
Do I feel like they're trustworthy? No.
To me, I feel like there should be more variables than, and this is just me being overly complicated, but I think there should be more variables than, he passed the psychology, the fast talk roll, so he automatically, no matter how ridiculous the lie is, should, even if it's a hard or an extreme, like where I just came from the moon and I'm here to give you this rock, and the rock will give you magic powers if you let me in. Got a critical. The guy should believe him. I don't believe that.
No, the GM will always override something like that.
But I look at it as, if the NPCs, we got to give the NPCs the same odds as the players, because if we don't, then it's just the players just kind of doing a line until they fail, and then they just go in another direction.
Well, actually, page 93 answers this question. If the player character is positively inclined toward the player's goal, don't bother rolling the dice. Simply have them agree. If the non-player character lacks strong feelings toward the player's goal, then no modifications to the difficult level is required. If the non-player character is strongly opposed, the difficulty is raised by 1 or 2 levels. The player comes with something to support their case, such as substantial argument, using persuade, or is holding a weapon, clearly will use it. The keeper should lower the difficulty. So
it's literally the Pathfinder rules. If it's like hostile, unfriendly, friendly, neutral.
Right.
I think it's offering you a way to deal with it if you want to do it mechanically.
Yes, exactly.
In most cases, you could just deal with it.
Yeah.
Role playing.
Yeah.
So the only other thing I want to add about the stats, because we have one more thing. Poor Jeff has just been waiting to tell us all about how chases work for so long.
Before we do that, I just want to add one tiny thing.
Let me finish what I was going to say, though.
Okay, sorry.
Call of Cthulhu isn't really a skill building level, but there is a mechanic that if somebody gets a hard roll or an extreme roll, I guess you can do it, that they can put a little check mark next to that particular skill. And at the end of the session, they can roll a 10-sided dice. Actually, first what they do is they roll to see if they can get over their normal skill. So for instance, let's say this character here has a first aid of 40%. At some point during the game, I got, let's say, a critical, an 01. So I put a little check mark here. At the end of the session, I'm allowed to roll my percentile dice, and if I get over 40, then I can roll a 10-sided dice and add those points to that skill. If I roll under 40, then I don't get to add anything to that skill. And that way your skills go up just a little bit. And they also get harder and harder to go up the higher you get. That's it. It's just a mechanic. It's a mechanic that almost all of us forget, and we forget it because the whole scenario only takes place in 3 days, and everybody.
Well,
dies.
it's virtually identical to the age in education modifier, isn't it?
Right. So even in a game like Horror on the Orient Express, we're only talking about a few weeks that are taking place, even though it's taken us almost a year.
Almost a year.
There's no way that you're going to become an expert in lock picking when you had almost no skills in lock picking before.
Well, it's and some
Right.
skills it just doesn't make sense either. I mean,
Right.
if you get a 1 in spot hidden, like the other night, got a 1 in spot hidden, that's not going to suddenly increase the acuity of my vision on a permanent basis.
But it,
Although
you're paying more attention.
yeah, or looking in places that you usually wouldn't have looked.
But I would think that it would make
Yes.
you more perceptive. Whereas in something like, let's say, astronomy is one of those kind of skills that you would have to go to school to learn more, I would think.
Well, I guess in the academic skills, it makes even less sense, because if you've passed a roll, it means that you have the requisite knowledge to carry out that task.
Yeah.
Although,
Right?
in my
So
opinion,
if you've got that knowledge, having the knowledge to say to identify Orion in Betelgeuse in Orion, you're not going to gain any more knowledge from having that knowledge, are you?
Although,
So that's.
but then I mean, you can gain a little bit more knowledge, things that you haven't seen before, known before. So, for an example, let's take genetics in the biology department of the science skill. You might come across some new form of science, or you might discover something new by rolling that critical success.
Maybe.
So now you can add that to your knowledge. Now, if your science skill is pretty high, it's going to be harder for you to, I guess, become even better in that particular field, just because of this small piece of knowledge that you've gained.
let's say it makes sense depending on the campaign or the scenario. In a Horror on the Orient Express, skill advancement, except maybe in areas like your language skills get better because you're using French more than you were using it before. Except for, and that it's only a couple of weeks in or maybe a month or two in reality, that it doesn't make much sense. In a game like Masks of Nyarlathotep, when there may be months in between each segment, then at the end of the segment, it makes sense that maybe your driving skill goes up, or your reading ancient tome, whatever skill goes up just a little bit. But anyways, that's all up to that. I personally think for the most part it can be completely ignored. But
While we're as we're finishing up skills, I wondered if everyone would be interested in sharing their views on Cthulhu mythos.
Well, the book says that you always start at 0. When I started the game of At Your Door, it said in 2016, and I reasoned that in 2016, as we've joked before, there are copies of the Necronomicon, and people, even without an interest in the occult, may have heard of this book, Necronomicon, and that it exists in that library because it's now famous. And you can maybe even go online and see photocopies of of some of the pages. So I figured I could give them a couple of points, because they have been exposed. They don't believe it. But
I mean, even saying that H.P. Lovecraft existed in this world, and he wrote Call of Cthulhu, and he has all these different names out there. It's out there. We look at it as fiction, but is it really fiction?
Oh, I just realized that all of H.P. Lovecraft's works become actually tomes, because when you start to see the deep ones, you realize, holy shit, H.P. Lovecraft was right.
Oops, everybody make a sanity roll.
You make a sanity roll.
But then again, you've also got the situation of, let's say that you are playing a character who's an occultist. Your occultism and Cthulhu mythos, while they're different, are in the same genre. So if someone's an occultist and has skills in occultist, it very well may be that while they were digging through those old occult tomes, that they might have come across Cthulhu mythos tomes, and therefore it could be done. My viewpoint is Cthulhu mythos is one of those kind of things. Is it's great to allow a character to play a Cthulhu mythos if it fits the storyline.
Well, let's compare occult and Cthulhu mythos. I think in the game, Cthulhu mythos represents reality, the way it really is. There really is a Cthulhu. There really is all of this. Occult represents all of the nonsense that we've made up for thousands of years. Mm-hmm. And you might be an expert in the occult and know absolutely nothing about the reality of it.
No, I'm not saying that you would necessarily know it. I'm saying it puts you in the position to have the opportunity to learn it.
I'm just saying that that's what those two things represent. So any time in the game that the characters come across something that's real, that they come across a tome that's speaking the truth, you know, what the truth really is, they're going to gain a little Cthulhu mythos. If they see a deep one, they're going to gain a little Cthulhu mythos. If they go into the Dreamlands, they're going to get a little Cthulhu mythos. And that's because they're actually learning something about the way the universe really, really does work. And
so what about the application of Cthulhu mythos?
That's a little tricky, but I think that it's usually, now you're going to compare what does the player know as compared to what does his character know. And of course, we all like our Lovecraft stuff. So I know all about Cthulhu. Does my character know anything about Cthulhu? I'm the player playing the game. I suspect, the player suspects, that this is going to have something to do with the deep ones. So I asked the GM, can I do a Cthulhu mythos? Because I think, or I might type this privately, I think it has something to do with the deep ones. Can I do a Cthulhu mythos? And he lets me do it. If I fail it, then it's like, no, you don't know anything about that. But if I do, and it's true, he can say, yeah, you're starting to figure things out, you know, however you want to deal with that. Because, yeah, when do you roll a Cthulhu mythos? It's only when you're starting to suspect something that has to do with Cthulhu mythos.
It's also used if you're trying to solve something, too. So, like, if you read a book about the deep ones and you're down on the beach and you see a strange track in the sand, in that case, you would be able to roll a Cthulhu mythos to see if you recognize what created that track.
See if you remember what you read 10 years ago. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah,
it's like an identifying based on either previous experience or based off of something that you read.
Okay, well,
Tom,
yeah.
Before we move off stats, and this is going to be really quick. I know that Jeff wants to do chases, and we've been doing it for 3 hours.
Yeah, I'm almost gonna leave soon. So
yeah. Well, then this is probably a good thing for the people who need to leave to kind of end on. We're GMs. We're all GMs here.
Mm-hmm.
So we understand, because you've brought up skill points being too high and stuff like that. Do we want to talk about when players cheat rolls?
Oh, yeah.
I said earlier that we play this game on the honor system.
Yeah.
And we have in the past asked players to leave, to stop playing with us, because for one reason or another. And cheating is one of those things. That's why I really advocate using the dice roller. Nobody complains then, you know.
Yeah.
What can you do? I mean, you cannot invite that person back, or
The thing being that if someone's inclined to cheat their rolls, then
why are
you know
they here?
they're not really committed to playing in the first place,
Right.
because you know half the time the most interesting things happen when you fail
your rolls.
You know,
Right.
especially if you get a critical fail.
Well,
I
and
mean,
to add,
You know, and it's you know it's because it's meant to be fun. That's the whole point, isn't it?
Right.
It's a game. It's supposed to be fun.
Actually, I find it when I do lose the most times, that's the best type of stories, you know.
I know,
Yeah.
because you get frustrated and you get angry, and then that one piece of information comes, and it's like, oh my god, I figured it out. Like my face during Horror on the Orient Express.
right. Now, the thing to add to that is the other cheat, and the one that is my absolute pet peeve of all, and that's foreknowledge of the game.
Yeah.
I always tell people, if you're going to play this scenario, you can't have foreknowledge of what happens. And well, because we're going to post this, I'm not going to say anything, but I occasionally have suspected people of going online and finding the scenario and reading it beforehand. And that is just the most despicable cheating. And it's cheating not only because the GM puts a hell of a lot of time and effort into this game and trying to make these mysteries fun to solve. So if somebody has foreknowledge, it's just despicable.
Right.
You know, in my
What did-
opinion.
My thing is,
the whole
why
purpose of the game.
play a game when you already read it and you know what's going to happen? That makes
Yeah.
little to no sense.
Now, on the other side of that, I have had a lot of experience now as a GM. And you've got to, as a GM, you've got to watch yourself, because the characters do correctly guess sometimes. And you've got to sit there and go, wow, how did they make that leap of, and it's like, and you listen a little while longer and you go, oh, okay, they're not like insisting that that's the truth. They're just accidentally, luckily guessing the truth.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's a hard
Keep your
road.
finger-
I mean, if you go back to Open Casket, and I looked at the way I played that character, because I always analyze the way I play a character, and it would look like I might have foreknowledge of it, and I still to this day have not read that adventure. But the thing is it's like there's just certain things that pull you together. I mean, it was all tied around, you know, dead bodies and cannibalism, and like the graveyard's the logical place to go.
Right.
Yeah. And I brought it up because, you know, we play online, and there's clearly a very simple way of, you know, figuring out whether or not you can cheat or not, which is the dice roller. You know, it shows everyone
Right.
your dice. I mean, I personally like using my physical dice more. My cats, however, stole them, so I'm gonna have to revert. Yeah, so I had to revert back to the dice roller now because my cat stole my physical dice. I have no idea where they are. But I'm talking mainly for GMs who play at a table with people, you know, and the numbers are so small you can't read them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, like I got a 15," you know.
Well, cheaters are only hurting themselves, and it's...
Well, the thing here is that you don't want to have those type of people, especially people who have foreknowledge of a particular campaign to play, because it ruins it for the other players.
If you, it takes time. Once you've identified somebody like that, then you just don't invite them back.
Yeah,
You know?
I think that role playing as a community, you know, the way you get good games and the way you have fun is when you have, not by trying and, you know, pulling new people and, you know, and all that, but by finding a nice group and sticking with them, because then you trust them, you have fun with them, everything. You look forward to it every day.
Yeah, trust is a big issue.
I also think experience has something to do with that too, because as we've already acknowledged, a lot of our players come out of games like Dungeons and Dragons, where it is about leveling up and becoming that heroic character. Whereas in Call of Cthulhu, in Call of Cthulhu, it's not about being the heroic character. Being heroic usually gets you killed. And if you go back and I've only played in one game with you guys, so if you go back to that game, I mean, it was hilarious. The most fun was when people started missing dice rolls and grabbing ass and stuff. That was the whole entertainment of the game. Was it's like, oh, I tried this and I failed. Me falling off a ladder. I mean, that to me is hilarious because it's outside of the realm of normality.
Right.
Well, I think for the players, it's about inhabiting the character.
Right. Exactly. All right. And
then the GM introduces the circumstance and the scenario, and the character inhabits that scenario.
Okay. So there's they don't come up very often, but let's deal with chases.
Yes.
There's a mechanic in the book that has to do with chases, and then we'll end it. It's over 3 hours that we've been doing this, but
yep.
I think that people might appreciate this because it's been a very interesting talk. So, Jeff.
Well, like I said, I will be honest with you, Tom. I don't fully understand the chase. So, I actually would prefer if we end it here and then maybe come revisit this again.
We can do that then.
I mean, I could probably just rush through something real quick, but then I'd be afraid that if I made a mistake and...
Okay, well, we'll chase this then at another time. Is there anything else that anybody wants to bring up?
I would like to just, let me go back to stats, or I'm sorry, skills, something I wanted to touch on and we got farther off the track. And that is what was it? The charm skill. Charm is not necessarily about female versus male, male versus female. Charm can also be non-sexualized as well. Someone can have a charming personality. And I think
it's like a charisma role.
I think a lot of times
when I think of charm, I think of William Powell in the Thin Man films.
And then finally, I would like to say, I think that one thing that this discussion is determined is for all you would-be GMs out there and players out there is game mastering is not science. It's art. Anybody could read the book, but it's knowing when to change a rule and what rule to change to make the game more enjoyable for everybody.
It's all about having fun.
Yeah. And I mentioned it earlier about the when we were talking about cheating, is the GM. If the GM is doing their job, if they're dedicated to being a GM, they've put a lot of work into preparing for this game. It's nearly impossible to pick up a scenario and just play a game without having thoroughly read through it, maybe twice. I always read through it twice, and planned. What are we going to do in this situation, that situation, and everything? So, players, if you're listening, make sure you're courteous to the other players. Everybody's preparing this game. They've thought about it. They've practiced all week long what they're going to say. So think twice before you cancel.
Here's the last thing I will say, and it's on the back end of that, is for the GMs, don't feel the need to cheat your players either. It can work both ways. If your players are getting the puzzles right or getting the scenario right, there's no need for you to throw something extra in there just to screw over your players.
God mode.
Don't need to rush.
Yeah.
Take your time. Let your characters explore the universe that they're in, and just remember, if they go off on a tangent, find a way clever and subtle to bring them back to the story.
Ideal roles are wonderful things.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that was one that we didn't really touch on. I really think that idea roles should only be used when the characters are completely stumped by what they need to do.
And then only as a little nudge
A little nudge.
Not,
Yeah.
not as an absolute reveal. You know.
Like, check that note that you got 3 weeks ago when we were playing. So, anyways,
I'm sure there was something in your pocket.
Anything else? Nope.
No.
Okay. All right. Well, we hope that you enjoyed watching this tonight, and we are planning, at least at some time in the future, to do one discussing player etiquette, and things like that. Maybe we'll do one entirely on character creation itself. And until next time, then, good luck and good gaming.
One
Jeff,
quick shout out. If you guys go to blasphemoustomes.com/videos, Paul Fricker, who is one of the guys who made all of these rules, he created a series of videos, and they're really excellent, and they're short, and they explain a lot of the rules. So I highly recommend you guys check that out.
What was the name of that again? I'll put a link in the thing.
Yeah, I'll send it to you. Blasphemoustomes.com, and then you can just find it from there. Blasphemous Tomes.
Fantastic. All right, folks. Good luck, and good gaming.